Welcome back to Meta Fanfic, the place where your favorite worlds get rewritten. If you love powerful, what-if stories, you're in the right place. Before we begin, hit that subscribe button so you never miss a new twist in the wizarding world. Today's story is one of our most exciting yet. We will see fifth part What If Harry Potter Became a Dark Slytherin. Let's dive in. Here is short summary. When the wards around Privet Drive fall, Harry Potter is taken, and returned forever changed. Casting aside his old mask, he embraces Slytherin cunning, uncovers forgotten secrets of the Hogwarts founders, and steps onto a darker path where manipulation, power, and strategy may be the only way to win the war. But before we start, if you want more stuff like this, then be sure to subscribe and like this video. And if possible, share this video with your friends. Now let's start the story. Before long, March was upon them and the first hint of spring was upon the air, even from way up the Scottish Highlands. Between Hermione and Harry they had remade another set of magic-suppressing cuffs. These ones wouldn't be used on anyone except their intended recipient. That intended recipient was Voldemort, when the opportunity came in order to ensure success. Quite a bit had happened since Walden McNair had been arrested, then mysteriously disappeared, having been last seen out on bail outside the Ministry of Magic. Not that anyone really cared much for the Death Eater's disappearance, except perhaps his family and Voldemort and just maybe a few of the Death Eaters. Hermione, Ron and Harry weren't stupid though, they knew Severus had something to do with Walden suddenly going missing. He had been a problem however, and now he was dealt with. They weren't going to cry over their problems disappearing, preventing news getting out of their actions. Knowing Severus as they did, they also knew that Walden McNair would never be found, nor his body. Severus was too good at what he did to be caught. They'd never had it confirmed from Severus' own lips, so they had denial on their side if anything should go wrong, and it would also keep Severus safe if the wind blew in their direction. They'd been meaning for weeks upon weeks to talk to Remus, who was in the school as the Dada professor of course, so no excuses, but things were always hectic between classes, pregnancy symptoms and constantly trying to do everything required of them this year. It was their last year of course, so they wanted to do well. Especially Ron, whose desire to be an Auror was becoming full-fledged. Between Harry and Hermione though, they were making sure Ron would pass all the required classes, between potions, charms and defense against the dark arts. When Severus wasn't dealing with current threats, which by the way he did not regret, he had finished the potion. Ginny Weasley was now no longer under the influence of Dumbledore's control. Anything he might have embedded into her mind before his arrest were no longer a concern. Unfortunately, he'd had to inform both Arthur and Molly. It had not been pleasant, but thankfully Molly had been appropriately cowed with a few choice words. -0 flashback 0. Severus reluctantly stepped to the door of the burrow, the Weasleys' home, not because he didn't like the property, but rather he didn't much care for the owners of the property. He was not going to enjoy this morning at all, the welcoming smell of bread baking and coffee wafting in the air. He gave the door a knock, half of it swung open, so he was visible to those who would answer the door. "Severus, is everything all right?" Arthur said, utterly bamboozled to see Severus standing at his door. Did Molly ask for more potions? As far as he knew, his daughter had advanced into her pregnancy that she didn't need any potions for morning sickness anymore. He was very grateful to him for brewing them. Make no mistake, he wouldn't have been able to afford it. Even with Harry paying off their bills, bless his heart, not with everything they had to buy, a lot was old baby things they'd kept from their own children. He was still paying Harry off, and always made sure to pay him first. He'd gone into a lot of trouble for them and he would always remember that. "May I come in?" Severus asked. He'd rather not discuss this standing in the doorway. He refused to feel like an unwanted urchin, not after all he had done to help their daughter. Not that they knew this at this point in time, but they'd soon find out. "Of course, I apologize, Severus, come on in," Arthur said, shaking his lethargic off. He'd just woken up. "Would you like a cup of coffee?" Aware of what he drank, they'd sat in enough meetings together. Order meetings were always chaotic, but those like Arthur and Severus observed and remained silent. Indeed, Severus murmured entering the Weasleys' domain. Surprised to see neither of the two female Weasleys, both Molly and Ginny. Molly's just helping Ginny up, she's finding it difficult to get up in the morning, Arthur said, with an amused smile. Regardless of how his grandchild had come to be, he loved the child wholeheartedly, and it constantly reminded him of his wife's many pregnancies. Yes, she's quite far along by now, I'd imagine. Severus said dryly. He knew good and well how long left she had to go, he needed to in order to get the potion done. She has a month left to go, Arthur said cheerfully, and he couldn't wait. Ginny was worse than Molly ever was. He didn't think there'd been a day where she wasn't complaining constantly. Thankfully, he was used to moody and pregnant women, so didn't take it personally. Then again, it wasn't what Ginny wanted. His daughter had been forced into a really young marriage to a man old enough to be her great-great-great-grandfather. Forced into a pregnancy, which they were still assuming was potions-induced, just in order to get the contract over with so that they may go their separate ways. Even after the marriage was over, nobody would touch Ginny with a barge pole. She'd have given birth to 3 children, and no wizard would want to look after kids that weren't his own. Sit down, he said, giving over a hot mug of coffee. What can I do for you today, Severus? I need to talk to both you and Molly privately, Severus stated, making it clear he wasn't asking but telling them, not that he thought for a second they'd deny him. It's regarding your daughter. Arthur swallowed. We've been keeping an eye on her. From what we've seen, she's stayed away from Harry and hasn't ridden any owls. He protested weakly, mind trying to come up with an explanation. Had Molly been letting her write letters to Harry? He certainly hoped not. Oh, it's nothing to do with that, I assure you, Severus replied, and he knew she hadn't. Harry would have told him immediately. Arthur sighed in relief, grateful that at least Ginny wasn't making things worse for herself. Her attentions on Harry were alarming to say the least. He'd never noticed it before. He'd just thought when she was 11 it was a silly little crush and she was in awe of his title. Nothing more. He wished he'd paid more attention to his little girl and made sure this hadn't happened, that the whole diary thing hadn't either. They'd never raised their kids to keep secrets, to hide things. They'd raised them to be aware of their surroundings and tell them everything. It had failed. Their daughter had been possessed, and they couldn't afford to get her the help she needed. She had been a little quiet and subdued but bounced back to her normal self in no time at all. They'd thought she recovered. He couldn't blame the diary for her actions, for he believed they were her own. We can talk in my office, Arthur said, pouring 2 additional coffees, one for himself and one for his wife, before making his way to his office. I'll be back in a moment, make yourself at home, he informed Severus, not seeing the grimace at the mere thought of staying here longer than necessary. To think he could still be in bed with Harry instead of doing this. Merlin help him, he must be mad. He was just hoping with it being early, he could curb Molly's usual attitude. He just did not want to deal with it. Unfortunately, he had to inform both her parents. Plus, if he tried to inform Arthur alone, he knew he'd insist Molly hears it from the horse's mouth, so to speak. It took 5 minutes before they returned, and the door was closed behind them, and Arthur raised a silencing spell. What's going on? Molly immediately demanded, hands on her hips. Severus just gave her an unimpressed look. That might work with her kids and husband, but it didn't work with him. Molly, sit down, let him explain, Arthur said softly, trying to smooth over the sudden tension. He knew his wife was overwhelming or annoying to others, but he loved her warts and all. She'd been like that since they met. Being the sister of Fabian and Gideon, it was little wonder she was so stern all the time. The boys had never taken anything seriously a day in their lives. Fred and George took after them in near enough all ways, frighteningly enough. Molly huffed as she sat down, staring at Severus in silent demand for an explanation, but she flinched after a few seconds and suddenly found herself drinking her coffee. She'd forgotten just how foreboding and fearful his full glare was. So, what's this about Ginny? Is her health in question? Arthur asked, knowing better how to deal with Severus than Molly did. It helped that Arthur gave Severus the respect he was due. Yes, actually is it, Severus replied, watching Molly puff up indignantly, and if you do not allow me to talk, I will walk out here and you can go to St. Mungo's to find out and then deal with the consequences and the research needed to fix it. That's if they find the problem at all. He informed her coolly, no sign of agitation over her overbearing ways. Arthur inhaled sharply. This was bad, whatever it was extremely bad. Molly pursed her lips, anything she was going to say caught in her throat. They couldn't afford to take Ginny to St. Mungo's. Never mind the testing, researching and brewing. Snape was implying that would need to be done. It would cost a fortune, and so she forced herself to remain placid even if it went against all she was. "What's wrong with her? What's wrong with my daughter?" she asked, in a quiet even tone, not an ounce of demand in her tone. When she returned to Hogwarts, the staff were watching her for obvious reasons. It became quite clear that she was in pain. Severus informed them seriously. Another member of staff noticed something very peculiar and odd, as well. "We took some blood from her, informing her it was to check on the child she was carrying. It was there we found that Dumbledore had given her or forced her into consuming an unknown potion that acts quite like the Imperious Curse. Have you noticed that she never has anything bad to say regarding Dumbledore?" "Why would she have? This contract was forced upon both of them," Arthur asked, calm and collected, his hand clenched tightly in Molly's, the only show of worry. "That may be the case, but Dumbledore took advantage of it," Severus stated, a sick look appearing on his face. "It wasn't a potion that got your daughter pregnant." Arthur and Molly paled, Arthur quickly snatching up a bin when Molly heaved, before being sick into the bin. Arthur rubbed his hand up and down her back as she continued to be sick, horrified by what he'd just heard. "She never," he whispered. "No, she wouldn't have. She cannot go against or speak against Dumbledore," Severus said, waiting patiently for them to regain their composure. "The potion was hidden from most detections, but fortunately we knew something was there. It's part potion, part alchemy, and it took me months to create an antidote that would work. I do not believe it was originally intended for Ginny's use, and would have created another if he hadn't been arrested." "Harry," Arthur quite quickly deduced. "Indeed," Severus said grimly, anger showing through his blank mask momentarily. With her being pregnant, there were a lot of fears that the potion had also gone into the fetus, and who knows the damage that's done on its own. Molly's lip wobbled as tears came to her eyes. "Is she going to lose the baby?" "I don't know," Severus said honestly, his tone softening just a little, which was very unlike him, "but with a child of his own on the way, well, who can blame him for going a little soft just thinking of it?" "So, I assume we have to wait until she gives birth?" Arthur asked, clutching his wife close, soothing her. "No, the potion has to be consumed before, so the baby gets the antidote right away, and will continue to do so for the last month it will be in her stomach." He couldn't even bring himself to say her name. He was utterly disgusted with her behavior and actions. "It's safe for the baby, but at the end of the day, since she's underage, married or not, you have the last say on whether she gets the potion or not. My advice to you is that you do not tell her what it is. We don't know what orders Dumbledore has given her. Informing her it is for the sake of the baby seems the best way to get her to do as asked." How will it affect her?" Molly asked, her voice thick and emotional, wanting to know what they would need to look out for. "She'll probably double over, feel a little pained, weird, dizzy, disorientated, and it will take her a few days to recover, but you'll probably learn a lot about Dumbledore that you wish you wouldn't in those days. She will be desperate to unload a lot of information and you being the closest will receive it all." Severus easily deduced. He knew how he'd feel if he'd been forced into constant silence over someone's actions and he wasn't a young teenager. "Would you stay just to be on the safe side?" Molly asked, aware that he had a certificate in healing. It was required of potion masters. She knew she was being cheeky, especially considering her actions, but if it went wrong and they had to go to St. Mungo's they wouldn't know a damn thing to tell them. "I shall wait in here. If anything happens come and retrieve me, if not, I shall take my leave," Severus informed them. "Dumbledore did not trust me and neither does she, both with and without the potion. It will make getting her to take the potion a little more difficult. As I've said before, we don't know what Dumbledore had said or ordered. He did not want to refer to Ginny by name or heaven forbid her married name Mrs. Dumbledore, unless of course, it was to her face. He was quite vindictive like that." Arthur and Molly let out a sigh of relief. "Thank you, Severus," Arthur sighed, grateful that he was going to stay. Severus bit back the retort. he wasn't doing it for them, no, he was doing it for the Weasleys that Harry was so fond of. His best friend, and the others, who would be the ones helping pay the loan back, just after getting their feet back after the Gringotts loans debacle. It was little wonder the boys couldn't get new things and live comfortably if they were constantly helping their parents. They did too, without much thought, they loved them all. Harry would feel obligated to help them again, and quite frankly, Severus didn't want that. He didn't want his husband to feel obligated to the damn Weasleys to keep giving them his money. Sure, he had more than he'd ever spend, they both did, but it wasn't just for them, that money would go towards their child and its upbringing should anything happen to the pair of them. Arthur's office closed, once the pair were up and on the move. No screaming, no shouting, all seemed calm and peaceful. He waited 10 minutes before he decided to leave. Just as he was about to apparate, Arthur came in looking drawn and tired. She took the potion, she's back up in bed now, sleeping it off. I honestly cannot thank you enough, Severus, what you've done. There wasn't enough words in the English dictionary to be able to convey the depth of his feelings. You're welcome, Severus stated sharply, before apparating away, not wishing to listen to their thanks any more than he already had. It made him feel uncomfortable. Although he had thoroughly enjoyed the challenge, he would miss interacting with Nicholas, although he would make an effort to visit now and again. He was one of the smartest men he knew, and Severus relished actually being able to talk to him about everything, and he did not speak in riddles like Dumbledore did. That was one thing over with. Now he could focus more fully on the war and his husband. Try to ensure they both survived it and came out on top. He was still reeling over the fact Hermione and Harry had recreated those bands. They were so utterly terrifying when they put their mind to something. -0 and flashback 0. Potter, follow me, immediately, Severus retorted sharply from behind the man-glamour boy in question. He'd purposely waited until his breakfast was eaten, not wishing to interrupt him, since he was just getting used to eating without being sick again. Harry threw Severus a faux glare, before sighing as if it was too much work, scooping up the last of his food. Now, Severus barked, waiting impatiently, as always forced to treat Harry the way he normally would. Hermione gave Severus a, "I can't believe you, Professor," look that she often graced the professors with when they were doing something she did not like. Everyone was watching the free show, as they often did. Severus had to prevent the surge of amusement from showing on his face as he thought on how they'd react to the knowledge that he and Harry were actually married. That they'd been married for a while. The time bubble had been the greatest thing that happened to either of them, and pretty soon, Harry was going to go down there again, to give birth to their child. A child, by the way. They still didn't know the gender of. Harry insisted on keeping it a secret until the very end, even from them. Harry had so many decisions taken from him in the past that Severus couldn't deny Harry the one thing he wanted. Harry had offered to let Poppy tell him if he wished, but Severus wanted to do it together. So, also refused to have the baby's gender revealed to him. After Harry was up, with a slight struggle, so not to bash the bump on anything, it was becoming increasingly clear he wouldn't be able to keep it secret for much longer, which meant chamber time. Sooner than either anticipated, which made their visit to Remus all the more important today. They'd been putting it off, but it could no longer wait. The both quickly and quietly left the great hall with everyone watching, just waiting to see whatever else Snape would do. Or say. Or what Harry would reply. He'd never taken Snape's words lying down, not from the get-go. Which Severus hadn't appreciated at the time. From the first, Hermione might know. Potions class to stating, "You don't have to call me sir." It was always amusing to see or hear about these instances. "Hey, come on in," Remus said, granting the pair entrance into his quarters, which was as always, for the teachers, right above their classroom. "How are you both?" He knew they were seeing each other. He was the only one that did other than Hermione and Ron. He had been a little leery of it at first, but it was obvious they cared about each other and they'd done the impossible for him. They'd cured him of his lycanthrope. The only downside, he couldn't tell anyone, still had to act a little bit exhausted after a full moon that no longer bothered him. It was for his safety and the safety of other werewolves. Voldemort would want that recipe, would want to give werewolves hope as long as they fought for him, and they would for the thought of freedom. We're good, but we're here for a reason, Harry said, wandering in and sitting himself comfortably on the left side of the sofa. Severus was quick to join him. I gathered as much, by the letter, so what is it? Remus asked, sitting down, staring at the pair of them curiously, from where he sat across from them on the single-seater. I'm pregnant, Harry said, watching his reaction gleefully. Nothing would ever beat McGonagall, who had fainted. She'd actually fainted at the news. It had been hilarious. I'm sorry, what? Remus said, shaking his head. He couldn't have just heard what he did. No. Don't be obstinate and obtuse. Severus sneered. You heard it perfectly fine. There is nothing wrong with your hearing. He would never get along with Remus Lupin, or any of the Marauders, not that there were many alive. Well, are you happy? Remus asked, his attention solely focused on Harry, wanting to hear him speak, not Severus. Very, Harry said, removing the glamour, feeling more comfortable in his own skin with it removed. Remus inhaled sharply. He hadn't realized he'd look so different. He looked a little like James with many of Lily's characteristics, but there was no overwhelming clone of, he looks exactly like James's shooting out at him. He had reached an age where James and Lily had not, by the look of it. Merlin, they would be so proud of Harry and who he had become. Your parents would be proud, he murmured softly. Merlin, they would too, even if Harry was pregnant so young. Then again, he wasn't young, was he? He was older than Lily had been when she got pregnant with Harry himself. Harry smiled. I know, and he believed that with the whole of his being. Then congratulations are definitely in order, Remus said, smiling blindingly at them. Does anyone else know? Honored that they were trusting him with this. Minerva, Hermione and Ron, Harry explained. She has to know so when I disappear there won't be mass panic. You'll be leaving soon? Remus asked, straightening up. You don't look that far along. He protested. Not yet, probably within the next month. You know, something always happens at the end of the year, Harry said, seriously. I don't want to take any risks. Holding his hand to his belly where his very vulnerable child sat, growing by the day. Well, yes, of course, Remus murmured, nodding quickly in agreement. Where will you? The chamber. Time bubble, of course. Yeah, we will be heading down there, Harry said, meaning himself and the baby. How will you excuse your absence? Remus asked Severus, from both Voldemort and Hogwarts. I will not be accompanying Harry down there until it's time, Severus revealed with a grimace, indicating he definitely wasn't happy with it. Unfortunately, he knew that needs a must, doesn't make it any easier. If they wanted to survive though, then they would need to avoid even the most outlandish accusation of them leaving together ever getting out. Ron and Hermione, Remus then assumed, having no idea of their reason for coming to him. Smart as he was, he knew that Harry hadn't truly forgiven him for his words when Harry was 13 about his parents. Plus, Severus was a whole other ball game. You, Lupin, we would like you to go down with him, Severus grunted. He was in no mood to beat around the bush, not that he ever was, of course. Me, I have no medical knowledge, Remus squeaked out in surprise. We're not asking you to help give birth, Severus sneered. When it's time you'll contact both myself and Poppy. Now that was an order and he made no qualms about making it sound exactly as it was. What about my job? This is an important year. For both those taking their owls and newts. Remus protested. So you're saying no? Harry asked, simply, not showing any emotion, his face remaining genial. How long will pass, up here I mean? Remus asked, mind mulling over the information. About a month in the chamber and 2 days up top, Harry said. I haven't exactly calculated it, it's not like he could, the baby wouldn't come on demand, it would come when it was good and ready. We'd need to inform Minerva at least, so she can find someone else to cover the classes, Remus mused, mind gently mulling over it. We will if you want to come, but we aren't going to force you, Harry said seriously. I know you enjoy working here, and I don't want to put that in jeopardy. Not that Minerva would fire him for all that of a few days missed work when they always had substitutes ready on the go. I want to, Remus said. He owed them more than he could ever repay, so if they wanted his help for a few weeks, he'd damn well take it. Well, it wasn't really a few weeks in reality, time moved different down in the time bubble after all. How long before we go? Anywhere between 2 weeks and the full month, Severus explained blithely, but that was just a front. Okay, I'll do it. When will we talk to Minerva about this? Remus asked, wanting to do it as soon as possible. We can tonight, Harry said. It was clearly important to Remus, but he'd always been a teacher at heart, so the fact he was thinking of the other students and wanting to make sure there was someone there to take over from him wasn't so surprising. Severus nodded. It was perfectly doable. The quicker they got it all planned out, the smoother it inevitably would be. He really hated the fact he couldn't go down there with him, but it would be worse for Harry since he'd be without him for months. I'll keep a to-go bag ready, Remus said. I can't believe you're going to have a baby. Is it a boy or girl? He couldn't believe Snape had married Harry, but there you go, they were genuinely happy and about to have a baby. Snape, a kid. The younger him, Sirius and James would have probably had heart attacks. Especially knowing that it was James Potter's kid, but things had drastically changed since they were at Hogwarts. We don't know, Harry said fondly. We want it to be a surprise. He couldn't wait until the baby was here so he'd know. He could actually find out any time he wished, but that wasn't going to happen. He wanted to wait. He just prayed that he got to watch his baby grow up with Severus at his side. Hoped and prayed that they would win this war and come out relatively unscathed. Potters are known for their boys, Remus said wryly, forgetting that the Potters had come from the Peveril line, which had consisted of 7 girls. Not all of them survived to adulthood, and no boys to speak of. Harry, however, was aware, but decided against getting into a tangent. He had classes to get to act as if everything was normal until it was time for him to leave for the chamber. At least he and Severus had made a show of still hating each other, and Severus, still trying to make Harry's life a misery despite the fact he was no longer allowed in potions due to the bust-up. Severus absolutely refuses to put up with the Potter brat, as it were. The public were so easily fooled, but it worked in their favor so they couldn't complain too much. Healthy is all we care about, Severus stated, although he hoped there wasn't too much of his characteristics in the child and that it primarily took after Harry. Merlin, who knows how Weasley's offspring would be, with such a deliberating potion having been in her the majority of the pregnancy. No child deserved to pay for its parents' crimes, but unfortunately, they did, almost constantly. He had added to it, too, and it shamed something in him just thinking about it. How are you going to explain everything? Remus asked, frowning in concern, worried about that. Nothing to explain. I'm 17, and technically Sev isn't my teacher anymore, so it's nobody's business. Harry stated firmly, plus, Sev won't be teaching after this. If I survive. Severus added seriously, yes, I have no intentions of returning to Hogwarts to teach long-term. They had bought a piece of land together, and had an architect draw up design plans. Adding and subtracting a few things, but they were due another drawing and they were hoping it would be the last one. Remus nodded, truly not surprised by the declaration, although the talk of not surviving had sobered things considerably. There's no guarantee of either of us surviving, Remus, Harry said softly, seeing the aghast look on his face. We've already made plans for the baby if we don't. Which might seem like cowardice to the entire magical world at large, having Hermione and Ron go on the run with his child and settle down somewhere. Honestly, if he wasn't enmeshed, through no fault of his own, Voldemort had continued to come after him, he would run too. He didn't want to be his parents, didn't want to put a war first, but if he wanted his child to be safe he had to do it. He was finally in crisp clear clarity seeing the decisions Lily and James had made, instead of just running to another country and settling down. History seemed to be repeating itself. Fortunately though, his kid wouldn't be raised by the damn Dursleys, wouldn't know a day of starvation or hurt. They would know love, adoration and happiness. His will would make that very damn bloody clear. No, the baby wouldn't have the childhood he and Severus had suffered through. Remus was actually on that list. As he was no longer a werewolf, they couldn't stop it. Remus breathed out. I know, he said pained. 2 wars he'd lived through, 2 damn horrific wars on blood purity and lost too many people he loved. James, Lily, Harry and Sirius. At least for a brief time he had Harry and Sirius back in his life, before Sirius had died, and he prayed Harry wouldn't become another Sirius, another Lily and James. All dying way too young. But this one hopefully will have a long and happy life, Harry said, trying to bring the conversation back around. Have you bought anything, yet? Remus asked, eager for the change in subject and grasping a hold of it. Ignoring Severus' eye roll, it was more fond than anything and definitely aimed at Harry. A few small things, Harry admitted, but only through Hermione. Him buying clothes would surely have it in the newspaper. One misleading conversation between Harry and Hermione and boom, they weren't interested. A cousin being pregnant and she is so excited. Harry always got a good laugh out of it. They definitely couldn't use a brother or sister and being an auntie, although that is most certainly what she'd be to his child. Gosh, the booties, he could scarcely believe anything could be so small. It made his yearning more pronounced. Nothing got to him more than seeing Severus' reaction though. He wasn't used to anyone staring at him like he was a bloody miracle. The whole boy who lived thing didn't count, it wasn't something he did. This sort of look was beautiful, breathtaking, and he couldn't wait to see that look transferred to their child when it was born. In hearts of hearts he hoped he still had some of that look left over for him. Severus had to suitably coach his face not to smile. He remembered Harry showing him them. They were white so they'd suit whichever gender they end up with. They fitted in the palm of his hands, with lots of room to spare. To think he'd have a child he could put them in that would be so small that the feet would be held in his hand very easily. They continued to talk, about simply and easy things, not wishing to end it on a sour note. Or rather Harry and Remus spoke. Severus remained just spending what time he could with Harry, relishing the peace and happiness that exuded from the bond and eased any of his worries while he was at it. Eventually, however, they did have to bid Remus goodbye. Not only did Severus have a class to teach, Harry had classes to attend. Harry hugged Remus quickly, thanking him quietly. Before he walked out, it wouldn't be long before it begun to turn into a waddle, and Severus realized he would miss it. Probably for the best. He might end up saying something that could get him into a whole lot of trouble, he thought with amusement. The moment they stepped out of Remus' quarters, however, his masks were back up full force. Both of them stepping back into their public personas. The next month was overwhelming to say the least, for everyone concerned. Between trying to keep Harry's condition a secret, and of course, the actual symptoms of pregnancy that Harry endured, and was having to endure secretly. Ginny's own symptoms would still be firmly enmeshed in people's minds, and so Harry couldn't take the chance of someone figuring it out. The moment they had all been waiting for happened during Charms. Harry, who as usual sat nearby Ron and Hermione, practicing their spell work. Since they were doing practical work, which they did a lot, it was important after all, since it was Newt Year. The simple spell backfired, and cotton candy of all things blasted out of Harry's wand. Not just a little bit, no, it swiftly overtook the entire classroom at an alarming rate, causing everyone to laugh in amusement, as they tried to escape the pink cloud of the sweet treat. "Make for the exit," cried out the excited but muffled voice of the diminutive professor, as he tried to contain the pink mess encompassing his entire classroom, but like shoveling snow while it was snowing, it was a useless endeavor as more quickly replaced it. One by one, the students stumbling all over each other tried to make for the door. "It tastes lovely," one 17-year-old claimed with laughter deep in her voice. Evidently she had tried it. "Try it," she told her friends as they finally got out the door, their clothes covered in little bits of pink spun sugar. "What the hell happened?" grumbled the voice of other students. "How did someone manage to muck up that spell?" "I know, right? Was it you, Seamus?" Seamus was renowned for mucking up spells, from day one onwards, although the reality was, Seamus had not had such an accident since his first year, where he'd admittedly messed up a lot of his spells, blowing up his feathers and his goblet while trying to make his juice into rum. "It wasn't me," he protested, annoyed by the constant reminder that he had screwed up spells when he was 11. Merlin, they never let him forget it either. It was ridiculous. "It came from the Gryffindor side," Draco Malfoy said haughtily. "Typical, Gryffindors, always screwing it up for everyone." "Shut up, Malfoy," Ron spat out, as Hermione and Harry managed to get the damn spell to stop malfunctioning and joining everyone outside. "I wouldn't be surprised if you somehow caused it." As always deflecting for Harry, so long as nobody realized it was him, that's all that mattered. It was one of you three, Zabini declared. It began at your table. Staring at the three teens suspiciously. Did not. Ron protested, glaring at the teen. Ron, Hermione said, shaking her head, don't engage in their pettiness. I'm sure the professor will figure out what happened. As always, the voice of reason, even if it was feigned. Ron was nowhere near red enough to truly be angry at the situation. You pregnant, Granger, taunted Parkinson. Nobody should be having that sort of accidental magic at Hogwarts. Not at our age, Weasley. No, wait. Dumbledore did something similar, nearly flooded out the greenhouse apparently, before Sprout managed to get a handle on it. Harry and Ron were tense around the eyes, but other than that, there was no sign that they were uncomfortable with the conversation currently happening. They did not like the speculation happening right now. It was much too close to the truth. Hermione rolled her eyes. Do I look pregnant to you? She asked bluntly. Honestly, you need to grow up. They all did. It was simply ridiculous, this house prejudice at their age. You shut up, Granger. Parkinson spat, her face screwed up in hatred. You uppity little mudblood. 50 points from Slytherin, Miss Parkinson. Flitwick called out from behind her, causing all the students to jump. They'd forgotten a professor was anywhere in the vicinity. 50. Draco cried out at the ridiculous amount of house points that Pansy had just cost them. Worse still, he knew when their head of house found out, that they would gain detention and more loss of house points because of the fact they said that dratted word in public. None of them were aware that Severus loathed that word for an entirely different reason. He could only say it was because they were in public. His spying duties had taken a great deal from him and he hated that. Do you need it to be more, Mr. Malfoy? Flitwick gave the teen a look, staring up at the boy with a steely gaze. Draco swallowed. No sir, he said, none of his usual displays appearing. He knew Flitwick didn't care for any subtle threats of telling his father or any such nonsense. Plus Flitwick, to be fair, was a good teacher and didn't play favorites, not even with his Ravenclaws. Good, Flitwick stated firmly. Now head to the library. You'll spend the rest of your class there, reading the next 2 chapters of your grade 7 charms book. You will behave and I shall be by to ensure you are adhering to the rules of the library. Yes sir, the class echoed, already beginning to move. Not you, Granger, Weasley, Potter, remain here, Flitwick stated before the trio could make a move to leave. What? Why? We didn't do it, Ron protested, while the Slytherins laughed, assuming they were going to get into trouble. I'm well aware you didn't do it, Mr. Weasley, Flitwick said dryly. Go on now or more points will be removed, glancing back at the lingering students, giving them a pointed look. They failed to realize the you in that particular part of that statement. I think perhaps it's time you spoke to your partner, Mr. Potter, do you not? Flitwick gave him a knowing look as he cast a spell to ensure their privacy. He could not only tell that Harry was bonded to Severus but that he was pregnant. You've passed the time you can remain at the school. For yours and everyone's safety you must stop using magic and remain safe. From Voldemort went unsaid but definitely understood by all 3 teens, or rather 2 teens and 1 masquerading as one, who were smart and didn't need him to spell it out. The professor has a point. That's pretty mild when you consider all your other bouts of accidental magic, Ron chortled, unable to help himself, grinning wildly now that the incident had passed. Hermione struggled to stifle her own amusement. Flitwick just grinned at the trio, considering what he'd heard over the years. A truer statement couldn't have been made. Harry pouted. It was hardly my fault. It wasn't like he'd actually wanted it to happen. Okay, he did, unconsciously, but not really. They all chuckled in amusement at Harry's expense. You need to inform Remus, Hermione sighed, the amusement short-lived. As it usually was nowadays, but that was life during a war. You learned to have fun while you could, but for the most part, it was a difficult life to live. War was not nice or easy. Yeah, Harry sighed, nodding resignedly. How did you know, Professor? How did he know who his partner was? That's for me to know and you to find out, Flitwick said, amusement dancing in his eyes. Now off you go. Enjoy the rest of your day. Thanks, Professor, Harry murmured. The teacher could have outed him in front of everyone but he hadn't, for that he was grateful. You just take care of yourself and that baby, Phileas said, his voice unusually soft without its usual cheerful squeak or serious demeanor depending on who he was dealing with. I will, Harry said sincerely, and with that Flitwick lowered the privacy ward, and re-entered his classroom, and begun to deal with the mess that Harry's magic had caused. The pink residue left behind was less easier to deal with than the dreaded sweet. He might just be lucky enough to have it dealt with before his next class. Well, I guess we best get going, Harry sighed, I'm starving. He added, suddenly feeling like he could eat anything and everything in front of him. Of course, it didn't help that some smells still made him want to be sick. We going to the rooms to get ready? Hermione suggested quietly. No, Dobby can get everything. Harry shook his head. He was for the most part, already packed and ready to leave at any given moment. He had known this day was coming, even if he was in no way prepared for it. Well, let's head for an early lunch then, Ron suggested, as always up for eating when he had the chance. Lunch won't be out yet for another 15 minutes at least, Hermione pointed out, but let's go. I didn't get to read the newspaper this morning. They were still looking for McNair. They were having zero success despite offering over 1,000 galleon reward for any signing or information on him. Of course, they wouldn't. Severus wasn't going to leave witnesses around after all. Bloody Slytherins making everything complicated, Ron grumbled, as they all turned and headed for the direction of the Great Hall. Hermione just shook her head. Ron was progressing, but there was still some prejudice left. Doesn't make their assumptions any less wrong. They were all probably thinking it, both Slytherins and Gryffindors. Hermione pointed out, which was no doubt very true. Yeah, true enough, Harry sighed. He'd have been thinking the same thing himself in reality. It didn't take long for them to reach the Great Hall, and unsurprisingly it was empty, but people would start coming in soon, since lunch would be served. They ambled over to their usual seats and claimed them, Hermione immediately spreading out the newspaper and obsessively begun to read everything, in order to see things that weren't always obvious. I wonder why Mum and Dad are getting in touch, Ron said, as the owl landed in front of him. Reaching out he took the missive from the bird, as Hermione added water to Ron's goblet, letting the owl drink from it. Oh, wow, I guess I'm an uncle then, not sure how to feel about it. She gave birth. Hermione perked up. Ron nodded dumbly. Twins, girls, the first Weasley girls since Ginny herself to be born into the family for 7 generations. Hermione winced, looking solemn. What is it? Ron asked, frowning, staring at the photos as if he could observe what made Hermione wince. My own? Ron asked, his tone a little more tense now. Heirs Ron, which means boys, 2 boys is what the contract demanded. Hermione pointed out, she wouldn't be free of the obligation until Dumbledore died or she gave birth to 2 boys. Oh, Ron murmured, biting his lip. Honestly, this whole thing was horrific and he didn't like thinking about it overly much. Well, in Azkaban hopefully he won't last much longer. He declared, it was the only upside to this entire situation that Ginny would have. When Dumbledore died and she was widowed, nobody would want her. She'd already had 2 children, and nobody would want to marry someone with children, not to forget how many more she had trying to fulfill the contract before he croaks it. What did she name them? Hermione asked, trying to peer at the letter and photo the Weasleys had sent. Harriet Ginny Dumbledore Weasley and Lillian Molly Dumbledore Weasley. Ron read off the letter, wincing and grimacing at the same time. Giving Harry an apologetic look, there was no doubt who she had in mind when she chose those names. Harry just shook his head. He and Severus had already decided not to use family names on their child. So Lily, James, Eileen were all out of the question, and Severus was vehemently against Tobias, so those were out of the running. It's fine, he sighed. Do you think she'll ever be normal? As in stop deluding herself, it was ridiculous really. She'd lamp those kids with those names just because of him. It was awful how deluded she was. It's gone on too long, Hermione informed them. I think one way or another she'll always be this way, despite the wish to the contrary. Ron stared at the table, not even reacting when the food came. He wanted Hermione to be wrong. He would like for his sister to realize the errors of her way and have a normal happy life. Instead of constantly imagining a life she just wouldn't have. She was not going to be Lady Potter with all the trimmings that came with it. He wondered what went wrong with her, and just desperately wished for things to be normal. Mum and Dad said sorry too, they couldn't talk her out of it, Ron added, still feeling at fault for what his sister was doing despite the fact you couldn't get farther from the truth. No doubt his parents were feeling pretty much the same. Red hair, Hermione pointed out, they babies were adorable really, definitely Weasley hair. Actually the Dumbledores were known for their red hair, Ron confessed with a grimace. Dumbledore had red hair before his went grey. There's a picture of him in the staff room actually. During his Professor of Transfiguration days, he'd found it while cleaning the room during detention. Oh, Hermione murmured. She had never known Dumbledore to have anything other than white hair, so she honestly was surprised by this knowledge. Surprised, but not overly concerned or bothered. Not after everything Dumbledore had tried to do to her best friend, and what he'd forced upon Ginny, even if the girl had been a devious manipulative little girl. And that's all she was, a shielded stupid manipulative girl, who failed to realize what she was doing to herself and Harry. There's going to be a celebration once we get home, Ron murmured, lips pursed, as he finished reading the letter. You've been invited despite the fact they realize and understand you won't want to come. They won't blame you and well, that's it really. That's basically the gist of the letter. Definitely not, Harry scoffed. He was not going to spend the entire time trying to avoid Ginny in a small setting. Not likely, and that went without saying whether he actually survived or not, since something was guaranteed to happen, and Harry was determined to see to it that this was final battle, swore to end Voldemort whether by killing him or seeing that he was arrested and spent the rest of his life behind bars with his magic bound. Thought as much, Ron sighed. I don't blame you. Maybe you should, Hermione said thoughtfully. Think of it as a coming-out occasion, have both you and your partner there as well as you know. The baby went unsaid, there were no silencing charms up. Rub it in Ginny's face that she doesn't have a chance. Ron said dryly, shaking his head. Who would have thought Hermione could be so vindictive? Wait, he already knew that. A vision of Hermione smacking Draco across the face filled his mind's eye. Oh, that had been when he had been well and truly caught. Despite their arguing he had worshipped her. Well, not solely for that reason, it might give her the push to wake the hell up and realize she doesn't stand a chance with Harry. Hermione shrugged, that he's happy, in love with someone else, and had a child. Do you want me to come with you? Ron asked, his face a mask of sincerity. He'd do anything for his best friend. It might have taken a while to let go of the anger and jealous, which had jeopardized his friendship, but he'd gotten there and his friendship with Harry was stronger than it had ever been since they first met on the train that first day. Hermione gave Ron a look that suggested she wasn't happy with him. She understood, she wanted to as well, but newts were so important. They both had dreams they wanted to see come to fruition, so to hear him offer caught her off guard. It would mean having to pay to take your exams at the ministry, Harry pointed out shaking his head. It was nice of Ron to offer, but it would be a costly mistake. He'd offer to give Ron the money, but he doubted the boy would take it. For his family he would, but himself? No. For each exam, both practical and written, I did my research. Dismay and disapproval in her voice. How they can charge that much is diabolical. I mean not everyone who is homeschooled can afford that kind of money. Oh, no, they come here for their exams too. Ron was swift to correct Hermione, still amazed him when he knew things she didn't. It was nice to be able to prove he wasn't a complete dunce though. I've never seen any, Hermione protested. Only Hogwarts students had been in the exam hall, she was sure of it. Well, no, you wouldn't. They sign in and sit and take their exams in McGonagall's office with McGonagall and a ministry official. Sign out when they were done and get escorted out. You aren't allowed to just wander around the school. As far as I am aware they begin 10 minutes ahead of us and obviously leave before we're done. Although, if they miss the appointed times, they'd definitely need to head to the ministry take them though. Well, that explains why she hadn't seen anyone. Anyway, your parents would go mad if you went. Missing and we can't tell them, Harry said getting back to their original topic. So, no, it's a nice offer though, and the only person he really wanted there was Severus and he wasn't going to be. Ron paled at the thought. Crap, he didn't think of that. Good point. his mother would absolutely murder him when she found out the truth if he did. Then smother him for doing something good. His dad would be proud regardless of what happened but still make him feel bad for worrying them. Harry just grinned at Ron as they ate. People began trickling in for their own lunch. It wasn't until class was over when the horde descended in droves. Seamus was still annoyed. As he sat down, everyone apparently was still blaming him. Harry bit his tongue, the urge to apologize strong despite their differences over the years. Unfortunately, he couldn't apologize without raising suspicion, so he kept quiet and kept eating. "Did you see who did it?" Seamus asked Hermione, exasperated beyond belief at the constant mocking from his fellow Gryffindors. "No, sorry," Hermione said apologetically. "I was reading," which wasn't strange. When she succeeded in casting her spells, she normally did begin reading. "Just ignore them, man. They're doing it because you're letting it get to you," Ron said in sympathy. Seamus just huffed but eventually nodded and began piling food on his plate. "One more class then we're done for the day," Ron said, grinning. He loved when he had less classes. Even when Hermione wanted to study and tried, and succeeded, in getting him to study too. "Yeah," Harry said thoughtfully. Thankfully it wasn't a practical class, otherwise he would have had to refrain from using any spells. He didn't want to risk another outburst. At least Flitwick understood. "It's time," Severus informed Lupin coolly, as he claimed his own seat in the Great Hall. Those were the only words he said to Lupin, as he gave him a look. Lupin's eyebrows rose. So soon? Thankfully they'd already informed McGonagall what was happening. So, him leaving wouldn't come as a shock, but it had only been a month, not months, like they thought. "Does it surprise you, Lupin?" Severus said dryly. Harry was powerful. It stood to reason that his outbursts would begin sooner. He didn't want his husband to be away from him, didn't want to be away from his husband and unborn child. It would be torture, but their safety had to come first. "Well, I suppose not," Remus conceded tightly, wondering what had happened to make them decide today was that day. He hadn't had a chance to make the syllabus he wanted enacted written out. It seemed it would require being hastily done, unlike how he wished. He'd had a month though, so it was his own fault. "When?" "Tomorrow morning, 5 am, Severus declared, deciding he wanted to have his bonded with him tonight if he was going to be away so long. It would be worse for Harry, of course. Since time would be a longer stretch down in the time bubble. He'd be an entire month down there while only a day would pass for him. "Where?" Remus asked. They were talking low enough so that nobody could hear them. "Head boy's room," Severus declared. It was simple and easy to get back and forth from his rooms to Harry's head boy room, so it wasn't a hardship. Plus, the head boy room was closer to the chamber than his. "Okay," Remus said, nodding. At least he'd have time to make amendments to his packing if need be. Then get some sleep tonight before he heads down to the chamber. "I'll inform Minerva later." He did not wish to leave without informing her. It was the least he could do after she gave him a job. Admittedly, everyone still believed he was a werewolf, even Minerva. It was only until the end of the war, and then the antidote would be presented to the world, allowing those who did not wish to be a werewolf to become human again. He couldn't imagine many people electing to remain a werewolf when there was a cure for them, and it was being made for them and they weren't going to charge much. Nuts compared to what it was actually worth, but Harry and Severus were aware that werewolves did not have the kind of money that was required to sell the potions off at their correct price without even getting a bit of profit. They were amazing. Remus was proud to be able to say he knew them both well. "What happened though?" Remus asked, deeply curious. "Haven't you heard?" Severus asked, a slight sneer in his voice. Even he had. The students were constantly talking about it. Given he had felt a powerful pull of magic and sheepishness through the bond, he'd known the second he heard the rumors that Harry was definitely involved. "About?" Remus asked. He rarely listened to the students. He found it rather evasive. "An incident in charms," Severus said dryly. "A mispronounced spell. It covered the entire room in candy floss. I do believe Phileas spent near enough the entire class period trying to disperse the sponge sugar from everything." Remus' lips quivered in amusement. "Lily did something similar," he confessed, "only it was bubbles, completely covered the safe house in them. Before Harry was born, James and Lily had been on the run. going from one safe house to the other, until they decided to try the Fidelius spell, unable to cope with the mental strain of constantly running with a child to look after. They were determined that Harry needed stability, a life, a bed of his own. He'd gotten that for all of a week before their world was torn asunder. Harry would love to know that, I'm sure, Severus stated quietly. Nobody told him much about his parents. Severus had regaled Harry with everything he knew, but when he'd learned that Harry knew so little despite having Lupin and Black in his life, however briefly, it had infuriated him. In the end it was mostly information about Lily's younger years that he'd told Harry, before their falling out, but Harry had been so very grateful for the information. So happy, that regardless of the hurt he felt talking about her, he did it anyway. Remus sobered up at that declaration, eyes gleaming sadly, well aware that he had let Harry down a lot. I'll tell him a few things, he promised. Severus nodded, pleased that Remus had understood his subtle reprimand. If he could put his heartache aside, he was sure Lupin could as well. And with that their conversation was over, both men digging into their lunch. Mentally and physically fueling themselves for their next classes, the students needed to learn everything they could to aid them in their exams which were looming impossibly closer. In fact, the first lot would begin tomorrow. Remus felt gutted that he was leaving even if only temporarily. This was the first stability he'd had in a few years, since he'd taught before in the past. He would do anything for Harry though, and this was the first thing he'd ever asked for. He was aware that he wasn't the first choice either. Harry would probably prefer Severus down there with him. Or his friends for that matter, but it wasn't doable. They had their exams to do, technically Harry did too, but the life of his baby came first. He was distracted from his ruminating by Phileas beginning to go into details, yet again, about the eventful morning he'd just had, finding the entire thing hilarious, and no doubt Remus was already aware of whom was truly behind it. It appears as though Mrs. Dumbledore had given birth, Minerva informed the staff, none of which were actually interested. Oh, what did she have? Remus asked, feigning interest out of sheer politeness, plus, he was fond of Arthur and Molly, despite what their daughter had done. 2 daughters, Minerva informed them, Harriet and Lillian Weasley. Weasley. Phileas squeaked in surprise, not Dumbledore. Pondering on what that meant, had they worked their way around the contract or was it because they were girls that the contract didn't care for their names? No, not Dumbledore, Minerva stated, none of her feelings on the matter showing on her face. Harriet and Lillian. Severus sneered mockingly, if that wasn't an attempt to get his husband's attention he didn't know what was. How original, and thankfully he knew Harry didn't want to reuse or recycle names from the family trees, our parents' names, and he agreed wholeheartedly. It was a lot to put on a new baby, expectations and such. No, he or she deserved their own identity. Do you think Harry knows? Remus asked. Do you think I care, Lupin? Severus' lips curled in disgust before going back to his food. He wondered if Nicholas had received his missive yet. It's the first time he had contacted the wizard since the potion had been a success. Hedwig had been grateful for the exercise though, judging by the grateful hooting it had been doing before swooping off in a graceful gentle arch. It was a beautiful creature. Hagrid had chosen well for Harry. The owl was as unique as Harry was. He allowed a small smile for a second before it vanished. I'm sure Harry won't be offended, Minerva reassured Remus, giving Severus a look that was supposed to convey disapproval. The worst thing was she didn't know whether it was for show or not. A lot of children will probably be named after him. Truthfully, it wasn't only Ginny that was doing that, others were. It was a surprise there wasn't a surge of Harrys in the school a few years after Harry joined Hogwarts, due to the baby boom after the war was over. Severus barely refrained from snorting. Minerva truly did not know Harry at all. Whether he planned on using the name or not, he was going to be offended. He hated having someone so blatantly interested in him when he had made it more than clear he didn't want her. It made him uncomfortable. Despite the progress they'd made, and how much Harry had aged, there were still things that made him step back. It was the same with him really, and PDA and emotional stuff made him uncomfortable, not as uncomfortable as it used to. He wasn't looking forward to informing Harry about this latest news regardless. Completely forgetting that Molly Weasley would have informed everyone she possibly could in order to brag about being a grandmother. Severus couldn't say he was surprised when he was called the evening after Harry went missing by the Dark Lord demanding answers. By the time he returned to Hogwarts, he was in severe pain, and after consuming his potions he was out like a light, making it impossible for him to visit Harry in the chamber. He was not allowing his husband to see the state he was in due to his disappearance, as it were. He knew regardless of what he said, it would be another guilt that Harry heaped upon his person. With him so far into his pregnancy, he wasn't going to let it. What hurt most was missing out on the last month of Harry's pregnancy, and the risk that carried missing out on the birth. It was on his mind constantly the entire day, very aware of the fact a month was passing each breath he took, with Harry in the time bubble. Harry was much more confident these days, after having someone to truly rely on, lean on in times of great uncertainty. Between him and the founders as well as his friends, he was sure, Harry's confidence had skyrocketed. He was no longer putting on a confident front, but actually felt it. It may well have something to do with age. Harry wasn't an insecure teenager anymore. He was a full-blown adult wizard, soon to reach 20 even if he was still considered 17 by the magical world. "Any news, Severus?" came the hissing voice of the Dark Lord, singling out the potions master and professor of potion at Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry. "No, my lord," Severus murmured subserviently, meanwhile barely refraining from gritting his teeth. For some reason the Dark Lord was paranoid that it was a move against him, and was seeking out answers. So much so that all he was doing was sending out his Death Eaters to seek Potter and bring him back alive. Nobody in Hogwarts has seen or heard from the brat. It had been only 24 hours. Nobody in the history of the world had had such a mass search for him. Between Death Eaters, Aurors and everyone within Hogwarts, it would have been hilarious if it wasn't so damn sad. He was just so grateful that his husband was safe. "I find that hard to believe. Potter is close to Granger and Weasley," Lucius drawled, sneering at Severus, doing all he could to redirect the Dark Lord's ire onto someone else, trying to save Narcissa the horror of him returning home tortured. "I don't believe the boy is farther than a mile from their location." Severus stared blankly at the Dark Lord, not even gifting Lucius with a glance. He was quite correct, for all the wrong reasons. Not that he would ever find out about that, of course. Granger and Weasley are much too panicked and worried for it to be feigned. Weasley's too emotional to be able to lie to anyone, let alone me. Severus replied, barely refraining from rolling his eyes. "They've been joining the searches for him. A wasted time. The brat isn't in Hogwarts," mentally apologizing to his husband. He was quite frankly getting sick and tired of having to repeat himself so much. Not that it mattered how many times he repeated himself, the Dark Lord was just looking for someone to take his darkening mood out on, and it just happened to be them that suffered. He just wanted to see his husband and ensure all was well with their child. All he had to sat him was the letters that randomly came up, sometimes 3 times a day, sometimes only 1. Those letters were a lifeline, that and the founders telling him about Harry's day and what he was doing. None of this showed on Severus' face as he kept his occlumency shields at full power. All memories of Harry and him safely tucked away in his memory palace, keeping him safe even if anything happened to his mental shields. If he was found out as a spy, then he wanted to ensure that the bastard didn't get much of anything out of him. Or worse, get any of Harry's plans. Not that they had actually made any end plans, their child had been their first priority. Once the baby was born, they'd no doubt get into a final plan to end the Dark Lord once and for all. What of the Auror's search for the boy? Voldemort's demand came next, clearly having no use for Severus' service. Severus didn't so much as twitch, remain passive just like the rest of the Death Eaters. It used to be terrifying spying on the Dark Lord for the light side. He had been grateful it had only been less than a year before he was defeated at great personal cost. Everything in him had rebelled at the thought of going back 3 years ago. Now though, he was petrified. He had so much more to lose. His husband, his child. He would die for them, but he would very much rather live. To see his child grow up, but if he and Harry couldn't, there were people who would raise the child as their own. It was a great comfort to his husband that they had something in place should the worst happen to them. Their child wouldn't end up suffering the same sort of childhood as them both. Forcing himself to shake off his thoughts and fears, he listened intently to everything that was being said. He couldn't find himself screwing up, not when the end was near, he could feel it. Or rather he was expecting it. The Dark Lord always pulled something off at the end of the year. He would want to end Harry while he was still at Hogwarts, surrounded by people who were watching his every move. Leaving Hogwarts would leave the Dark Lord blind where Harry was concerned, so yes, he was definitely worried and he would want to end him as soon as possible. Hence why he was using all his resources to try and find him. He was scared of what Harry could become, and he had a right to be. Trained and taught by a spy and the 4 founders of Hogwarts, he was formidable, and had done a wonderful job of playing the part of a floundering 17-year-old. There hadn't even been a suggestion of Harry not being who he was before the end of the year. He was confident that they were in for more than a fair shake in ending the Dark Lord's reign of terror. He wasn't sure entirely if it was wishful thinking or not. Any sign of McNair? He had disappeared off the face of the earth after being let go on a very expensive bail and hadn't been seen since. A collective round of tense, "No, my lord," echoed around the room. Severus refrained from giving a very feral grin just thinking about what he'd done the wizard. They'd been friends once upon a time, or rather McNair had pretended to be his friend, all in an effort to recruit him to the Dark Lord. Their pretense had cost him one of the people who had genuinely cared for him but found herself unable to follow or accept his path. Without magic he'd been pathetic easy to subdue and deal with. He'd let off a lot of frustration during that little bout of vindictive murder. It hadn't been his primary goal, of course, which had been protecting Harry from his little short-sightedness when it came to sending McNair to the Ministry of Magic. Truth be told, he hadn't thought of it himself. They had been utterly idiotic to believe the Ministry would actually do their job for once. He'd done it for them, one less scumbag in the world. "What are you all still doing here? Find the brat," Voldemort ordered, furious beyond belief at their inability to find one stupid little brat who had no resources beyond Hogwarts and his 2 pathetic friends. He should have been found by now. "Lucius, Severus, remain behind," he added. His voice was as always quiet. He had no need to raise his voice, or shout. When he did though, everyone in a mile radius suffered immensely. Lucius swallowed thickly as he stepped out of the circle and prostrated himself at the Dark Lord's feet, sweating a little at the thought of what may be coming his way. Severus himself did the same thing, awaiting new instructions from their lord. "Bring me one of Potter's friends," sneering at the word friends, finding the entire thing pathetic. The need for human connection, it was always everyone's downfall, and it would be Potter's as well. "We'll see how quickly he comes running to their aid, and then he would kill the brat once and for all." When everyone saw their last hope was dead, they would prostrate themselves at his feet for mercy, and then he could begin running this country like he was meant to. The Muggle-borns would be rounded up and killed, and Hogwarts would once more be a proud school filled with purebloods. Then the idiotic Muggles would be systematically killed, until Britain was fully under his control with nothing but wizards and witches. "My lord." There in Hogwarts, Lucius trailed off. Contrary to popular belief, it wasn't easy to just stroll through Hogwarts to kidnap a student. Between the portraits and students and teachers, there was no way they could actually accomplish it. Not without being suspected and inevitably arrested for said kidnapping. "Will we plan something for when the train pulls up at King's Cross?" he suggested. He definitely didn't want to go to Hogwarts. His magical signature would be registered when he entered the grounds. The headmistress would know he was there, and would be met with zero chance of getting away. He prayed that the Dark Lord would allow them to plan something for the train station. Or perhaps Hogsmeade Station. It isn't nearly as protected. The idiots in the Ministry don't believe the children are targets, Severus sneered. The only genuine response he'd had here, the Ministry, was pathetic. Even the Order hadn't listened to his sound advice. He knew the Dark Lord infinitely better than them, but no, heaven forbid, they actually listened to someone who knew better. They'll be more likely to think King's Cross may be a target due to the Muggles on the platform. Ensuring they attacked a place more likely to have more protection. Telling them he intends to attack would ensure they listen to him. Idiots, the lot of them. "King's Cross won't have horrors, I'll ensure it," Lucius said through gritted teeth. You cannot guarantee it, Severus stated firmly. Despite being, under the Imperius, you are not trusted within the Ministry of Magic fully. However, the Blasted Order have many Aurors in which have posited the idea to the Ministry themselves. They're desperate to stop any attacks, especially due to the lack of any. He added smugly, as if he was rather impressed to see them running around like headless chicken. Lucius flushed an ugly shade of red at the implication of Severus' statement on his person. Go with Severus' plan, just get it done and bring one of the brats to me. Voldemort retorted, as amusing as it was to watch their degradation of each other. He wanted Potter and he wanted him now. Hopefully his servants wouldn't let him down again and would find the boy before the end of the year. He did not like Potter's disappearance at all. All his plans were in dire straits if they didn't find him soon. Yes, my lord, Lucius said, barely hiding his sourness, bowing low again, before standing swiftly and leaving along with Severus. Where shall we meet to make a plan? Lucius asked once they were out of the room, his fury undampened as he stared at Severus in seething rage. There is still a few days until school lets out. Severus stared blankly at Lucius, not at all intimidated by the blonde. A few order meetings I'll have to attend, looking as though something foul had landed under his nose. We'll get it sorted before the train leaves the platform. Until then there is nothing to be done. Which was the truth, but he would need to warn Ronald and Hermione, as well as get them to warn Longbottom and Lovegood, who could be vulnerable as well. Very well, Lucius conceded through gritted teeth, before turning swiftly and leaving, too pissed off not to be grateful that for once he wasn't in excruciating agony as he left, after being held under the Cruciatus curse for the Dark Lord's enjoyment. The end of the year, which meant his son would be returning home a fully fledged adult and graduated wizard from Hogwarts. The Dark Lord would expect him to be marked, to participate. Narcissa was scared beyond belief for their son, and so was he, and there wasn't a damn thing they could do about it if they valued their lives. He felt like a failure as a husband and as a father, and what did he get for his added troubles? Cursed relentlessly and endlessly for failing tasks that the Dark Lord knew were impossible to achieve. Welcome to his life. How had he become too disenchanted in less than a year? Severus watched Lucius depart, shaking his head, before he too left the Dark Lord's hideout, before he pushed his good luck. Changing his attire so that he didn't return to Hogwarts in his Death Eater apparel. He then apparated with a loud crack. Severus found himself back at the castle. He had never felt more adrift. Due to the nature of the bubble, he couldn't get a feel of Harry or how he was doing. He felt as though a piece of him was missing, and it was the blankness where Harry's emotions was absent. The bond they shared ran very deep, and he knew he didn't want to experience it dying off entirely. He would never recover from that deep cold ache in his chest. Foregoing the carriages, Severus walked. The closer he got to the school, the more he contemplated actually visiting Harry. In the morning he could inform the Order of the Dark Lord's latest schemes and moves. He immediately went to his room, and began to gather clothes for his time down there. Already changing from his teaching garb, he'd prefer to be comfortable, and these stiff robes did not scream comfort, or feel it. Then through to his bathroom, and packed up his toiletries and other essentials he'd need. Everything was folded neatly and placed in his bag. Before he could do much more, a pop indicated the arrival of Dobby, perhaps with another letter for him. Master Severus, it be time, Dobby said solemnly, but he had a manically excited gleam to his eyes. His master Harry was giving birth. The next Potter Snape child will be soon here. Very well, take us down. Severus summoned everything, heart pounding. Well, so much for rest, he thought. Yes, sir. Dobby positively beamed in happiness, as he grasped Severus' hand and transported them to the Chamber of Secrets. Severus moved swiftly towards the head of Salazar Slytherin, stepping into the bubble entirely, and one step closer to his husband he hadn't seen in a day. It's the longest they'd been parted, longer still for Harry, Merlin, an entire month. The feeling of the bond flaring to life made him close his eyes for a second before he was rudely interrupted. Severus, Harry said, eyes lighting up, even if he felt pain flaring within him. Severus padded over to the bed, absently noticing the green rugs Dobby must have bought for Harry's comfort. It was really warm in here. Was Harry feeling the cold? Sliding under the covers, Severus joined his husband, wrapping his arms around him, just relishing in the feel of him in his arms. He didn't say anything, he didn't have to, his contentment and happiness buzzed through the bond. Harry leant against Severus' chest, staring up at him, eyes soft and filled with love and adoration. Is it okay for me to lie like this? Not wishing to cause Harry any pain. Dobby was no doubt already retrieving Poppy as they sat. Harry tightened his hold, answering without speaking, both stroking Harry's stomach, just feeling out his baby with their magic, connecting the three of them together. Harry murmured, "I love you," shifting a little as Severus' fingers tickled him a bit, he'd missed him so very much. Even if he was getting to spend time with Remus and learn even more about his parents. "And you," Severus replied. Merlin only knew if they'd have years of this to enjoy or mere days. It made them all the more determined to enjoy what time they did have together. No regrets. Just as Harry had said all those years ago, right in this very place at the beginning of their relationship. Harry's smile turned into a grimace and unwillingly a groan of pain passed his lips. He wasn't sure exactly what was going on inside of his stomach, but it bloody hurt. Considering all he'd been through, it was saying a lot that he found it incredibly painful. "Easy," Severus murmured softly, rubbing at a specific spot on Harry's stomach, causing a sigh of sweet relief to run through his husband. "Don't close off the bond," he warned him. Once again, he knew Harry was doing it to save him experiencing that pain, but it was pain he wanted to experience. He'd been through worse in his life, he could take it. Shared pain was better than enduring it all himself. "Ooh, that feels good," Harry said, arching his body farther up, as far as he could, which wasn't far these days. "Poppy will be here soon," Severus promised, allowing Harry to get comfortable and splay himself out across Severus' chest. The sack containing their child was beginning to deteriorate, magic waning, hence the pain, a warning of their impending fatherhood. "Where's Lupin?" "Sleeping. I didn't want to wake him, he's been taking really good care of me," Harry told Severus, feeling the guilt and self-frustration envelope his bonded. "We spoke a lot about my parents, it's been nice. I think we needed it," trying to assuage Severus' guilt. He'd literally just gone to bed an hour ago. It was very early morning here, Harry thought, but with him doing so much sleeping he might be entirely wrong. "He did," Severus murmured, not as surprised as he ought to have been. He had suggested it to Remus, but he hadn't been sure if he would pluck up the guts any time soon. It had been extremely unfair that Harry had missed out on tales about his parents due to their grief. He didn't deserve it. He now had no need to hoard the few scraps of information he'd had about his parents in the past, between what Severus was able to tell him about his mother and, of course, Lupin's tales of his parents. "Severus, Harry, what on earth is going on and where are we?" Poppy asked, staring around in complete and utter bewilderment. A house elf had interrupted her cleaning of the hospital wing and transported her here without a word. "Do you know you have everyone searching for you, Mr. Potter?" Her displeasure becoming known. "Poppy, Harry's pregnant and preparing to give birth at this very moment," Severus explained calmly. "Male bearers didn't get round while pregnant. Not like witches did when she was pregnant, they merely looked as though they had a beer gut of sorts. The sac expanded, so to speak, as the baby grew inside. It was designed to protect the baby and the bearer." "He's what?" Poppy gaped, staring at Harry as if she had never seen him before. "And are you?" Her disapproval clear. "They are bonded, Poppy. Remember that Harry isn't just 17 anymore," Helga ordered the healer, very much disapproving of her abrupt censure of the situation at hand. She was judging Severus and Harry, people she cared very much for, and would not see harm come to. Poppy flushed, clearing her throat. To be fair, she had forgotten what she'd been told. Harry hadn't come to her to get that checkup, and he'd only seen him looking still a little bit too thin for her liking. Now though, she could see him clearly, and he had filled out significantly, and he looked healthy and happier than she'd seen him before. It must have been one hell of a glamour. "My apologies, Severus, Harry," she murmured, red in the face. "I need Madame Pomfrey's kit," Dobby said, clicking his fingers, and everything Poppy would need appeared before her. "All is well, Poppy," taking no offense. Honestly, she didn't matter to him enough for him to care about her censure. Right now, all he cared about was her safely delivering his and Harry's child, and taking care of his bonded. Dobby, collect 2 large bowls of water, Helga politely asked the house elf, a stark contrast to how she'd just spoken to Poppy. Her displeasure known, in all the time she'd spent talking to Poppy she'd never seen such a judgmental side, and she disliked it immensely. Poppy seemed to realize she had crossed some sort of line, and deflated a little. She adored her conversations with Helga and hoped she hadn't spoiled that friendship. Life in the hospital wing got tedious and so very lonely, she hadn't realized how much until she had someone to talk to almost constantly. Ow, 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 Harry cried out, his entire back spasming in agony. What the hell, I thought with the baby getting cut out it wouldn't hurt so much. By length of time or... You thought wrong, Severus said dryly, shaking his head. As the sac begins to deteriorate, you'll feel it. It can be excruciating and you cannot get anything for it, not until it's over and the baby is out. Wincing as Harry tightened his grip on his hand in silent retaliation. Helga nodded in agreement. She'd been completely stunned to hear how rare bonded couples were and how rare it was for male pregnancies because of it. Bonded pairs with a high magical core tended to very easily have children. It had been no surprise when Rowena informed them of Harry and Severus' impending fatherhood. At least in the UK, so much so that there were no books on bonding or male pregnancies, at least nothing new following the founder's time. It takes somewhere between 15 minutes to 40 for the sac to deteriorate enough for it to be cut and the child extracted safely. Helga added, with a little luck, you'll be on the lesser time scale. What happens if you try and it's not time? Harry asked, sweat beading at his forehead, face screwed up in pain. A minor shock. Magic prevents anything from getting inside until it's time. Helga explained, a zap, nothing to be concerned over, you'll know when it's time. How? Harry asked. Poppy listened intently to everything that was being said as she unpacked everything. Sterilizing her equipment, despite the fact she had done so after helping Ginny Weasley give birth. It was imperative that everything was sterile and clean. Severus held Harry close, feeling what Harry was through the bond, not fully, but enough to know how much pain he was in. As always, Harry was persevering through it, refusing to show weakness, or what he perceived as a weakness. His entire body was taut like a coiled spring, for minutes at a time, before he relaxed when the pain stopped, which was when the magic layer finally fell away. It was described a dozen of layers. The more layers that were peeled away, the worse it got. He just wished he'd had something to give Harry to help so he didn't need to ask. Your magic will tell you, Helga said, sounding a little helpless. She honestly couldn't begin to tell him what it would feel like. Everyone described it differently and everyone went through it, that was all she could say. Dobby. A bowl of ice water please, Severus requested, as Harry leaned his head against his neck, which was slick with sweat. He grimaced a little, but made no other mention of it. In the grand scheme of things it was unimportant. Do you know the gender? Poppy asked, a slight smile on her face. She didn't often get to help give birth. She shouldn't like to think so considering her matronly duties were for 11 through 17 years of ages. She'd done it a few times with witches who trusted her from Hogwarts, and even rare the one time in St. Mungo's during the summer holidays. She liked to help out there when she could. No, Severus shook his head fondly, accepting the bowl as it was placed on the side of the bed. Picking up the clean cloth, dunking it into the water, he began to meticulously wipe Harry's head in the cool liquid, mopping up all the sweat. Feeling the gratitude through the bond. And the sheer relief. We decided we wanted it to be a surprise, which was true enough. Gender held no importance to them. They weren't like the purebloods who demanded a son and heir. Anything else was unacceptable. Another flare of agony consumed Harry as he continued. His mouth remained firmly closed as he endured the pain without a sound. Poppy was very impressed with Harry's pain tolerance. As she shuffled around, do you have anything ready for the baby? She asked them kindly. It was best to have at least a cover or blanket at hand. Well, 2 really, one for when the baby comes, until it's clean, and then another for afterwards. We do, Severus confirmed. It's in the wardrobe. They had planned this from the moment they found out. They'd known this was where Harry would give birth. Green leather bag, he added, as Poppy went to retrieve the birthing items. He still couldn't get over just how small the booties were. Their child was going to be so tiny. He'd seen children in passing, but that was the extent of his experience with them. Doubt began to cloud him. What if he did end up like his father? He had no patience for the students here. What's to say he wouldn't be the same with his own flesh and blood? He thought, as he massaged Harry's stomach, or worse, mentally and emotionally abusive. He'd hurt Harry already. What if he did the same to their child? Swallowing thickly, fear clouding him. They're coming closer together, Poppy said, knowing exactly when Harry was in pain, or as what women would call contractions. What Harry was feeling wasn't exactly that, since their bodies were so vastly different. That's good, it's nearing time. It takes less and less time as the layers are removed. Be prepared, it's a short window. Helga explained, as the three other founders remained quiet but alert, watching over Harry and Severus diligently. I observed a male pregnancy once, Salazar confessed. It actually took over an hour and a half before the sack gave way to the knife. The founders groaned in disbelief. Honestly, this was Salazar's attempt at comfort. Harry giggled a little. Stop trying to help. They had a boy. Last time I saw them he was 2 years old, spirited. I found myself unsurprised that he had taken so long to come. Salazar continued on relentlessly. Considering how stubborn you both are, we might be in for a night of it. Severus rolled his eyes at Salazar, lips twitching. He could see that Salazar's conversation wasn't unadvised or unwanted. Harry was relaxing and actually listening. Why did you observe it? Harry asked, speaking through gritted teeth, closing his eyes at the feel of the cool fresh water and cloth wiping away his sweat. It's like his pores had turned into bloody taps. It was relentless and never-ending. Were you close to them? He could see no other reason as to why Salazar would be there, unless it was a potion. Smart, but no, not a potion. This was before Hogwarts was built. Well, we'd just started planning the foundations, Salazar confessed. Rowena and Godric were off hunting for dinner, and Hela went off to find us water. It was before the water spell was invented. Didn't take us long. It was rather inconvenient to trudge for miles. Harry avidly listened to Salazar speak. He loved hearing tales of the founders' times, especially when it came to how they lived their lives. No plumbing, no preservation, you had to hunt for your own food. They'd built the school up one brick at a time. In the freezing cold Scotland Highlands, enduring years of it, it was little wonder the founders were so close. To have that sort of vision, it took someone special, or rather for someone special. He wasn't the only one. The others were just as avid in their listening as well. I think it's time, Harry said, a great big shudder racking his frame, as a sudden coldness enveloped him. Like he had just been submerged in an ice bath. Then the pain hit him like a freight train. How would you describe it? Rowena asked, only to be met with a muted scream and a grind out of painful at the top of Harry's lungs. Poppy sliced through Harry's side, gloved fingers pressing around through the incision, before making a bigger one until she was satisfied. The blood-clotting spell prevented a mass of blood oozing from the wound. Got it, she said, an amazed look on her face. This was her first male birth. She doubted she'd be doing it again. She could feel the outline of the baby and the immense saturation of magic coming off it. Where do I cut? Severus narrowed his eyes, unprepared for her not knowing what the hell to do. He stiffened, much like his bonded, seething fury enveloping him. Harry and his baby meant more to him than anything. He should have ensured someone who would know what they were doing. Front and center, Helga stated, there were small veins around the sac that ensured the baby got all the nutrients it needed. The pouch or sac acted like a womb. Have scissors at the ready. I'm sure the father will wish to cut the cord. The cord, if followed, would accumulate to all the veins, which is what they called them. It might be something entirely different now. Severus inhaled sharply, his gaze never wavering from Poppy, as he watched. Ready to do what needed to be done to help his bonded if anything went wrong. Harry was in a severe amount of pain. Dobby was waiting with an open vial in his hand. The second the baby was out, Severus would ensure his husband received it. His heart was pounding erratically in his chest. This was it. Whether he was ready or not, he was about to become a father. After that he felt he was going to need a bone-mending draft for himself, if Harry pressed any tighter on his wrist. Which was throbbing painfully, but he didn't care. Harry was in much worse pain, and if gripping him helped him cope, then so be it. It was nothing compared to what he'd been through at the hands of the Dark Lord. It was regretfully the same for his husband. "Merlin, you should have woken me," Remus cursed, as he shuffled into the room, wide but sleepy-eyed. "Harry suggested we let you sleep," Severus bit out, not even gracing Lupin with a look, as he watched Poppy's hand slid into the incision on Harry's stomach, and emerge with the squalling pink baby. "There, baby. If you value your life, give me that potion," Harry hissed out, not daring to move a muscle for fear of causing more pain. He was literally frozen in pain, but it was a familiar feeling, and he knew it would cause more pain, so he remained still. He also ignored Salazar's quiet chuckle and Remus' ineffectual petting. Severus accepted the vial from Dobby, who thrust it forward, eyes avidly on everything happening. Maneuvering a bit, he slid the vial against Harry's lips, and he drank it down greedily. "It's a girl," Severus whispered in awe, as he observed his child loosely wrapped up in a blanket they'd bought for her so long ago. Watching as Poppy pressed her against Harry, her bearer, who had done so well and endured so much to get her brought into this world. Harry was slowly easing as the pain diminished. Severus slowly cut through the cord, as Poppy added a clip to the bottom. Just staring at his child, unable to believe he had helped to create something so innocent and pure. The tuft of hair, Severus was sure was black. He was brought out of his thoughts by Lupin. "Here," Remus said, passing over a bowl of warm clean water, so that Severus could clean the baby girl. Avoiding looking at Harry's stomach, which was still gaping, from where he'd had a child emerge from his body. Instead his focus remained on the girl, a baby that was squalling the rafters down, but the founders almost drowned out the noise as they celebrated the birth of the latest Prince Potter Black Snape with hollers and cheers. They were enthralled by the baby, just staring at her so utterly smitten. Once the wound was healed, Severus passed over a salve, which was slathered on before bandages were pressed onto the area. Poppy working diligently and professionally, keeping the area clean as she worked, removing the sack entirely. It had been magically created, it would also disappear through magic soon enough. Best not keep it inside though, just to be on the safe side. Severus and Harry then proceeded to slowly and meticulously clean their daughter up. The soft sponges made sure that her delicate skin wouldn't be abraded by the clean. They didn't care about the loudness of her crying, or the noise it made. Staring at his little family, how could he go out there again? Knowing what he was risking in a way he never had before. Sure, he'd known he was going to be a father, but his child was here, his daughter was here. Before his doubts could get the better of him, Harry spoke. "Look what we did," Harry said, his voice cracking with emotion, blinking tears out of his eyes. "She's beautiful," Severus said reverently. "She could have been purple and he would have said the same thing. I just hope she gets your nose," he added bluntly, causing Harry to giggle before groaning, "Don't make me laugh, it hurt like blazes." The founders and Poppy chuckled as they watched the scene with happy smiles, well, except for Salazar, naturally, but his eyes were gleaming. "My apologies," he said solemnly, but his dark eyes were gleaming brightly. His little family, something he'd never expected to have in his lifetime. "What are you going to name her?" Remus asked, reminding them quite vividly that he was still there. Harry and Severus smiled at each other, before staring down at their daughter. "Grandad Remus, say hello to Willow Sage Potter Snape," Harry told him proudly. Despite the lingering pain, sweat and tears, his face beamed in delight. "Only Potter Snape?" Remus asked, slightly surprised. Also surprised they hadn't put Lily in there somewhere. Harry nodded. "If we have a boy, he'll be Black Potter Snape, and able to claim the Black Estate. Willow wouldn't be able to claim the Black Estate, it was entirely patriarchal, and even he couldn't change their ways. Although, he could transfer a lot of funds from it, but no, she couldn't become the Black Heiress. However, she could claim the Potter Estate, and of course, her father's estate, and Severus had a lot of money she'd be claiming when he passed." Severus relaxed further into Harry, glad to hear that he wasn't thinking the worst right now. If they have a boy, it was more than he'd ever spoken about their possible future except that one day. With this fight on their hands, anything could happen, so it was understandable that neither wanted to plan too far ahead in the future. They'll never need money, even if none of our children can claim the Black estate. He stated firmly, and it was true, between him and Harry they had enough to give any of their children. Even if they only had Willow. Harry nodded. Well, Grandad Remus, do you want to hold her? Yes, Remus said, tears of happiness running down his face. Take a picture of us first, Harry said somberly. If they died, they wanted to leave her with at least one picture of them together as a family. Where's the camera? Remus queried. He had no idea Harry even had one. It's in my bag, at the bottom of the bed, Harry said, leaning back against Severus, exhaustion dragging him nearly under. It would be the first picture of them together, and hopefully not the last one. Poppy was quietly and unobtrusively cleaning everything up, performing a diagnosis on both him and the baby to ensure they were both healthy and healing. Remus ended up taking more than one picture, more than filling up the spool within. He knew just how precious these sorts of moments were. Inhaling sharply, he put the camera away, shoving those thoughts from his mind. They would survive, they had to, he couldn't lose the one thing he had left. She can't stay down here, Harry said, much to the surprise of Severus and Remus straightened, befuddled by his sudden declaration. What? Remus questioned, wondering if he had it all wrong. Severus doesn't deserve to miss any of Willow's development. As soon as I am able, I'm coming out. I would have to anyway, but only if you keep her with you, in the room of requirements. Harry said, turning to Severus, eyes already drooping. He didn't want to let her go, he just knew it would be unfair for him to miss anything. Plus, he was probably going to be sleeping a lot, recovering, and it was unfair to allow Remus to do something and have them both missing out. Severus honestly didn't think he could love Harry any more than he did at this very moment. If we live to a ripe old age, I will always remember this moment, Severus said softly, knowing how much it was hurting to let his daughter be taken out of his sight. That he was doing it so he didn't lose out on a moment, it was so haunting, heartbreakingly Harry. He wanted to refuse, but he wasn't going to. He didn't want to miss out on anything. It was time that they came back to reality. Remus smiled, easing closer, and scooping the small bundle up. Potters always looked like their fathers, while the prince line was obvious in Severus. He wondered who she would take after growing up. He silently agreed with Severus, hopefully she'd gain Harry's nose and looks. I'll get her bottle ready, don't worry, I'll bring it to you, he said, giving them a few moments to themselves. He had a feeling Severus would be doing the feeding. Harry was not long for the world of consciousness. Just rest, you've more than earned it, Severus whispered softly, but Remus heard as he left. Shaking his head, it was weird, hearing Severus anything other than blunt, caustic and sarcastic with anyone. He often wondered how Harry got under all Severus masks in order to see what was always there and bring it out. Are we doing the right thing? Harry asked, tiredly. Right thing, unfortunately, yes, but it is not easy. Severus whispered right back. Hell, just watching Remus Lupin walk away with his child made him want to drag her right back to the safety of their arms. Congratulations, Salazar Slytherin said with warmth and pride. The next generation, let's hope she's as smart as the pair of you. Unable to help being sarcastic, what could you expect? He was Salazar Slytherin. Harry chuffed, smiling at Salazar, and giving a rueful shake of his head. One last thing to do to keep the world safe for his daughter, just one last thing. He prayed they both survived. They're both doing well, I want to see him the moment he comes out, Poppy whispered quietly to Severus, giving the wizard the assurances he needed, as Remus returned with a bottle and the baby in his arms. Severus couldn't have claimed her quick enough. They'd need to move, soon, clean bedding and such, but for right now, he was content to let Harry rest and feed his daughter for the first time. Nobody noticed just how awkwardly Hermione and Ron were at holding hands. Ron's face was red, looking thoroughly embarrassed. As they walked down the steps of Hogwarts, beginning the trek down to the train for the last time. It should have been nostalgic, but as always, things weren't quite what they imagined them to be. Ron, Hermione and Harry certainly hadn't imagined all those adventures when they began Hogwarts after all. Ron, I swear to Merlin, if you screw this up, Harry, reprimanded him, I'm not about to bloody snog you or anything, stop being so bloody awkward. Squeezing his hand in warning, yes, it was a little awkward, but there was a lot riding on this. Well, excuse me, I'm about to be bloody kidnapped, Ron Squeak whispered out indignantly, I still vote for the other option. There is no other option, now shut up. Harry hissed, causing Ron to blanch. He looked like Hermione, so it was quite natural for him to react. Just keep your wits about you, for Merlin's sake at least Hermione is safe. While his husband was out there on the front lines, his life at risk. He was also on the front lines, with no guarantee this would work. If they both died, their daughter would grow up without them. Ron gave Harry an apologetic look, forcing himself to relax. Harry was right, at least Hermione was safe. So was Willow, and those were the most important people in their worlds. He was aware that this could go so wrong. They were only going on what they had found out, what Voldemort could and would potentially do. It didn't take into account everyone else. Everyone other than them were potential casualties. Classmates, friends, and they knew this but had said nothing. They couldn't risk it. Which ed so hard? Ron narrowed his eyes on Draco, who looked undeniably smug, and was most assuredly staying way back more than necessary. All the Slytherins were, as a matter of fact, son of a K.S's, they know. Ron harshly hissed under his breath, aiming his face away from them so not to give the game up. He might be impulsive, but he wasn't stupid. He couldn't risk his best friend's life. Of course, they do, Harry said, snorting, which sounded undeniably weird coming out of Hermione's mouth. She did not snort, period. Ron huffed. He hated the Slytherins sometimes. Christ, there were kids as young as bloody 11 here. They themselves were only 17. 17. And they were condemning everyone here to death. For all they knew, everyone could be killed. It was just disgusting that they were just letting it happen, all for what? Blood superiority. Gritting his teeth, I can't believe they'll get away with this. Get away with what? Neville questioned, glancing at the redhead as he made his presence known. Nothing, Ron squeaked out, glancing at Hermione, knowing that Harry wouldn't be able to help him out of the small hole he'd just dug. If you say so, Neville said, giving Hermione a look as if to say, what's up with him? Harry, as Hermione just shrugged, giving him a, what can you do, look in return, which made Neville frown and narrow his eyes on both of them. Ron and Harry shared a look. He was definitely onto them. Who the hell? Neville didn't get a chance to finish. Shut the hell up before you blow this up. Be on alert, something is going down, understood? Harry said, grasping Neville's lapel, giving him a serious look. Harry, Neville whispered, eyes wide. Well used to Harry's words and mannerisms to realize that's who was pretending to be Hermione. Plus, it really didn't take a genius, since there was only one of the trio missing, so to speak. It was a normal conclusion to each. Look, an attack is imminent. Just calm down, and get everyone, especially the first and second years, to head back to Hogwarts and do not let them get on the train. Do you understand me? Harry warned Neville. He was going to do it anyway. Continuing their lazy pace, already near the train when he delivered his statement. Yeah, Neville squeaked. It was really weird knowing Harry was in there, but looking like Hermione. Sure, he'd heard of Polyjuice, but he'd never actually seen anyone using it. Although, he knew Harry, Ron and Hermione had used it before in the past. This was going downhill fast. Why did he convince himself he could portray Hermione so well? Especially if Neville of all people could read her better than he could play her. Then it didn't matter, as Death Eaters began to apparate onto the platform. Get back to the school. Neville hollered, wand already out, spells blasting from his wand, the confidence the DA had built in him coming to the fore. Move it. Run, 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 shoving the younger years behind him in the direction of the school. Don't make way for the train. Ron shouted, get for the school. Panicking when he saw students actually running for the train. Idiots. He wanted to shout, why go for an unprotected train for Merlin's sake instead of the safety of the Hogwarts wards? He wanted to wring their bloody necks. A barrage of spells left every member of the DA as they worked together as a team, helping who they could of the younger years behind the wards of Hogwarts. The students were scattering in every direction, making it impossible to help everyone. Blinding explosions lit up the night sky as they fought for their lives. A whole variety of different colors, most prominently green, bodies falling, as lives were prematurely ended, all because of one man's quest for power. Crying and screaming could be heard for miles, as the train, which housed fleeing students and teachers who had gone after them, exploded, compartment after compartment. The blasting continued long after the train had been obscured from view due to the smoke bellowing everywhere from the explosions. Surely nobody who had stepped on the train could have survived. "Get back!" Ron yelled, choking on the black smoke bellowing from the train. Tugging Hermione's hand, keeping her with him, they couldn't be split up. That would destroy the plan entirely. Is it just me, or is this not the plan? Harry wanted to stop and help everyone Ron was urging him past, even though he knew that the likelihood that they were dead. Faces too wan, too still, the killing curse. "He's here," Harry said, freezing, shaking his head. No, 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 this wasn't supposed to happen. They were supposed to be taken to Voldemort and put the bracelets on him. Without magic he'd be useless. What? Ron grappled, almost losing focus. Come on. Barely able to see through the smoke, not daring to cast any spells in case he hit someone friendly. The smoke worked for and against them. On one hand they were obscured, but on the other, the smoke was thick and tangling at the back of their throat, making it impossible to breathe properly, let alone cast spells without coughing. Harry shuddered, praying that Severus had called Dobby and got him to get Hermione and their daughter out of the school. He didn't care where. Hogwarts wasn't safe anymore. This wasn't just Voldemort trying to get his best friends, he was planning a full-out assault. Why had he changed his mind? Had he suspected Severus all along? Or were they just hoping to do two things with one task? "Maybe they just can't find us," Ron suggested. "Should we clear the smoke? It would also make them a target if they couldn't see, then at least the Death Eaters couldn't." Harry didn't wait on Ron doing it. Instead he cleared the smoke with a wave of his wand, only now noticing that Ron and he weren't the only ones to do it. No, everyone was. It didn't take long for the smoke to disperse. Who all had been in that train? Merlin. He'd seen children as young as 11 go in the train. He was as responsible for not speaking up as the Slytherins. And Ron knew this too, which was what had caused his earlier mood, Harry realized. The second they did, they were run at by 4 Death Eaters. But why was Voldemort here? If not to take over Hogwarts. The Death Eaters were supposed to take them to Voldemort. It had all been meticulously planned. Stupefy. Bombarda. Ron cast, blasting the stone Hogwarts motto, causing debris to fly everywhere, hitting the Death Eaters. They couldn't let it happen too easily after all. Stupefy. Stupefy. Bombarda Maxima. Harry cast, trying to sound as much like Hermione as possible. The Death Eaters were simply trying to stun them, and they weren't sure how long that would last. Diffindo. Ron. Harry cried out as his best friend's weight caved under the cutting spell that had severed his leg. Denuo. He cast immediately, knowing if he didn't, Ron would lose that leg, but it cost them precious seconds, and before they knew it, they were bound tightly, and in the grip of 2 Death Eaters. The other 2 were down, one dead under the weight of the stone motto at Hogwarts gates, the other had been hit in the jugular by a sharp pieces of debris stone. Hermione. Ron cried out, pale and shaken, the blood loss getting to him, as well as the severe pain radiating all down his leg. They were grabbed tightly, and marched away from Hogwarts and back to the train station. Hearts pounding, they were surrounded on all sides. This was not how it was meant to go. They were supposed to just be grabbed and apparated. It had been too long. Soon the polyjuice would wear off and Hermione's visage would fade. Then Voldemort would have what he was really looking for. "What do you want?" Ron asked bravely, defiantly. Despite all the adventures he'd been on with Harry, the closest he'd come to Voldemort was when they'd been in the Ministry of Magic, and Dumbledore was dueling with the wizard. Harry's not here, trying to keep the focus on him, so that Harry could focus on getting the bindings off them. He wasn't able to do wandless wordless magic like Harry. Harry was a whole other class. He was a Gryffindor after all. "He'll come," Voldemort sneered, staring at the red head as if he was a bug under his shoe. Ron swallowed thickly. He was absolutely terrifying. His heart was pounding away like a drum. How long had it been since Harry took the polyjuice potion? How long did they have before the potion wore off? Where were the teachers? My lord, the wards are preventing us from gaining access, Lucius said smoothly, his worry for his son tightly concealed. Then destroy them, Voldemort hissed out, Hogwarts will be mine. He would kill Harry Potter today and take over Hogwarts, and the Ministry would follow. He cared not even for a second about the fallen Death Eaters. They had served their purpose. Had led to this moment, which would see him taking over magical Britain. Harry glanced behind him, finding the area deserted, and everyone within Hogwarts, the teachers at the front and center. Harry couldn't see Severus anywhere, but the bond thrummed with fears, worries and grim determination. There were teachers missing. He hoped that not all of them had died in the explosion of the Hogwarts Express. The Aurors will have been called. Hopefully they will get here soon, if for no other reason than to protect the others. His stomach twisted just seeing the children's bodies strewn carelessly, not but children caught up in a war not their making. No, this war had been going on since the 60s really, and it was time it ended once and for all. Ron made a noise, staring at Harry. It was a familiar look, it was one he had given Ron himself, back in their second year. When Ron's disguise began to fade while they were using polyjuice potion, the dawning horror boggled eye look. Harry grimaced, closing his eyes for a second, focusing all his will on freeing both of them before he was killed like a young lamb stuck in a binding. If he was going out, he was taking Voldemort with him, or at least making it so that he couldn't hurt anyone else again. He could do this. Harry's far away from here, he won't come. Ron retorted sharply, terrified to his core. Where is he? Voldemort snapped, narrowing in on Weasley, his anger brewing. Even if I knew, I'd never tell you. Ron snapped, feeling Harry's magic shivering along his body. Loyalty means something to me even if it doesn't to you. He goaded the wizard. Crucio. Voldemort spat out, furious with the boy's blatant disrespect, especially in front of his followers. And all Ron felt was searing hot redness seeping into his body, unaware of the shrill screaming coming from his throat. Where is he? Voldemort demanded again. Ron could do nothing but croak in shock. How had Harry survived this being cast on him twice? He thought, his mind fuzzy and almost to the point of shutting down. Then he felt it, his body easing out of its bound state. He kept his wits enough around him to stop himself from just collapsing, which wasn't easily done by the shaking his entire body was undergoing. To think Harry had run after 2 bouts of the Cruciatus curse. He didn't know how his best friend had done it. Crucio. Then at the exact same time, not my son, came the booming protective voice of Molly Weasley. A volley of spells was launched on the Death Eaters surrounding the Dark Lord Voldemort, while the others were surrounding Hogwarts still trying to tear down the wards, which wasn't easily done, especially with the new spells and warding Hogwarts had undergone after Dumbledore's arrest. Strengthening them. The Order had arrived. Those that love fight much fiercer than anyone in the world. They fight to keep those feelings, to keep their families safe. Can you imagine holding your newborn child in your hands vowing to keep her safe, then going off to war so she can grow up in a world with peace, prosperity and love? All these things that wouldn't exist if he survived. Can you imagine how much conviction that would lie within you just so you can raise her? Remain the family you hope to be. These things are foreign to the Dark Lord, all he knows is anger and disgust. He cannot fathom the feelings that drive others to fight rather than kneel down in defeat. Harry heard Rowena's voice in his mind, vividly recalling what she'd said all those years ago at the beginning of his training. Finally understanding what she meant, he wanted so badly to see her grow up. She'd known all along that he'd have a daughter. You remember how to duel, don't you, Voldemort? Harry spoke, his visage beginning to return to normal, as Hermione's features slowly began to melt away. Showing the world who was really there with Ron, and it certainly wasn't Hermione Granger. Or will you hide behind your Death Eaters like a coward? He spat. Voldemort's face was one of deep profound surprise that Harry almost wanted to laugh at him. Remember to bow, Harry taunted him, jerking his body downwardly but keeping his gaze rested upon Voldemort. Not leaving his sight for even a second. Wouldn't want to forget your manners, now would we? Voldemort's nostrils flared in fury, anger coursing through him with the likes he hadn't experienced since he was a youngster. Gritting his teeth, ruby eyes flaring as he copied Harry, flaring out his robes dramatically, as the Death Eaters withdrew, forming a circle around the two. Harry glanced at Ron, flicking his wand. Harry, no. Ron's protest was cut off when Harry cast an Alert Ascendere, and Ron was blasted off his feet, through the group of Death Eaters and into the safety of Hogwarts wards. He didn't look back to see if someone had aided him in slowing his descent. Ron choked, scrambling to his feet, hating Harry for doing this, but at the same time fully understanding. Harry didn't want to lose anyone else he loved because of Voldemort. Him and Hermione and Snape and Willow were the only things Harry cared about in this world. He would die for them, to save them, so they could live. He would too. Shaking and shivering, he wasn't at all surprised when the wards refused to let him out. His eyes bugged. Harry had maneuvered the wards to let him in despite the fact they were on lockdown with the barrage of attacks by the Death Eaters trying to tear the wards down. How had he done that? It should have been impossible. No, it was impossible. What he did shouldn't have been possible, it went against all magic. Ron watched in despair as the Order fought the Death Eaters. They were losing, more and more Death Eaters were appearing, overwhelming them. Going sickly when he noticed his mum and dad were surrounded. Merlin, his mum, was amazing. She was fighting so ferociously that he couldn't help but admire her and dad. No, Ron cried out, pressing uselessly against the barrier as his father was cut down. No, please, Merlin, no. He didn't want to lose his parents, didn't want to lose anyone. Why had Harry chosen to protect him? No, he couldn't think like that, he thought, choking on a sob of sheer frustration and terror. Just then the Vendicatory appeared, causing Ron to stare in disbelief. If he thought his parents were amazing, the Vendicatory were mesmerizing. They were cutting through the Death Eaters as though they were butter, killing them mercilessly without a single doubt about their actions. Why were they there though? Ron watched as his mum immediately dropped to her knees towards his father when all the Death Eaters were dispatched near her. Ron didn't remove his gaze from her, heart pounding. She wasn't crouched over crying. This was good, wasn't it? It meant his dad was alive. He bit back a relieved sob when he saw his father sit up. Weak as it was, it meant he was alive. He was alive, his parents were alive. He swore and promised to Merlin never to take them for granted if they all survived this. He'd do anything it took to repay anyone anything if his family survived this. Harry too. Harry was his family, even if he wasn't by blood. The duel between Voldemort and Harry was savage and fast-paced. There was no single opening in which Harry could manage to get the bracelets on him. Was it even an option now? Or were they going to have to do something Harry didn't want to do? Harry didn't want to be a killer, which was why they'd created the bracelets in the first place. Plaga, Vulnus, Ictus, Vulnus, Exentero, Exentero. It would have been hilarious to see the look of alarm on Voldemort's face if not for the seriousness of the situation. He was clearly not expecting him to be as experienced as he was. The spells he was using were bordering on dark. Okay, probably were dark, and some old enough that they weren't categorized by the Ministry. Unfortunately, it only encouraged Voldemort to fight back more deadly. He couldn't get an opening to remove the cuffs from his pocket, which had a containment spell on it, magical containment spell. The second he removed them, Voldemort would know what they were, so they had to move astonishingly fast. He'd been practicing with mock bracelets. Unfortunately, he hadn't been dueling for his life during those instances. He had to wait for his chance. Pungo, Perfodio, Perfuro, Spiculum, Protega, Cuspis, Avada Kedavra, Avis. Harry hastily cast. It appeared Voldemort was getting pissed at him, as the spells became steadily more violent. The green deadly spell was absorbed by the birds he'd conjured, saving his life in the process. Glacies Coligunt. Flinging ice shards at the wizard, hand already in his pocket, withdrawing the bands and Alleges Duplicia Carpi Ulnaris. Hissing the password in Parseltongue under his breath, so that neither Voldemort or anyone else in the area could hear him. Voldemort banished the ice shards except the one that caught his leg. He wrapped his leg in a bandage, just as he felt the hair on the back of his neck stand on end. His magic reacting viscerally with whatever had caught its attention, rearing back instinctively. Which proved to be his downfall. He couldn't prevent the bands being secured around his wrists. Voldemort fell to his knees, shock consuming him, as he processed the fact he'd lost his magic. No, not lost it, he could still feel it under his skin, he just couldn't let it out, use it. Even his wandless magic wasn't available to him. Harry stared stunned, unable to believe he'd actually done it. Only to blanch and scoot back as Voldemort approached him. He had not once in any equation on how he thought this would go, would have thought Voldemort would elect to physically assault him. Choking as those long pale fingers wrapped themselves around his neck, Harry kicked and punched out, scratched at Voldemort's hands to no avail. Red eyes boring deadly into green, reading him like a book. If Voldemort was going down, he was going to take Harry with him. Potter, Amadeus called out, flicking out his dagger, which slammed down precariously close to his ear. End it now. Purple Eyes didn't watch, he immediately got back to his own fight. The duels were winding down, even the Death Eaters that had been trying to get into the wards had stopped and rejoined the fruitless fight that the dark was losing. Harry weakly scrambled for purchase, to grab whatever had been flung at him. Finding the handle, it didn't take a genius to figure out what it was. Wrapping his fingers around it, his sight beginning to dim. A vision of his daughter and husband dancing before his eyes before his grip tightened on the handle and he thrust out. Originally aiming for Voldemort's chest, but his aim instead the dagger jammed itself into Voldemort's throat. It sliced through him like butter, the blade magically strengthened. Gasping for breath, as Voldemort finally let go, his hand slipped and sliced further through Voldemort's neck near enough decapitating him. Spluttering horrendously, as the blood poured all over his face, mouth and chest, scrambling back, gagging at the taste of copper in his mouth. He'd done it. Voldemort was gone. His family was safe. Scrambling further back still, he stared at the dead body feeling nothing. His ruby eyes already dimming and soon to be clouded up. Swallowing thickly, he'd expected to feel something, anything, but he felt nothing. No relief, no happiness, no smugness, no anger, just nothing. Shock, he realized, he was actually in shock. Whether it was because he'd almost died, killed someone, or managed to actually kill Voldemort and survived he didn't know. Harry remained sitting there amidst the battle, his attention so far away that he didn't hear or see anything that was occurring. Didn't see the Order fight back and kill any of the Death Eaters who came at him in revenge. Didn't see the Vendicatory go after the fleeing Death Eaters to take them down, ending this needless loss of life once and for all. Harry. Ron bolted over to his best friend, the second the wards were forcefully lowered by the headmistress. Harry. Breathing hitching at his best friend's blank stare. Merlin. Harry. He shook him a little to no success. Had Harry been hit with a spell? What if he didn't recover? He blanched when he saw how close Voldemort was and scooted away a little, but keeping close to Harry. Severus. There's something wrong with Harry. Ron shouted, using his name without meaning to. After listening to Harry use it all year, it was hardly surprising he'd slipped up. The only good thing about it being now was the fact it didn't matter if anyone heard. There were no students near enough to hear anyway, and everyone else was too busy to pay attention to Ron. A spell or something. Severus approached, his pace unhurried and face unworried, or it might have something to do with the terrible limp the potion master was supporting. He's in shock, that's all, he informed Ron, able to tell through the bond. Grimacing at the blood that coated Harry's entire body, removing his cloak, he put a warming charm on it before wrapping it around Harry. He just needs time to process what just happened. His own clothes ripped and torn, with various wounds in still stages of healing. The worst one was down his chest, it had blistered blackened skin. Ron blanched just seeing it. Shock. Ron mouthed, forcing himself to stare up, so he didn't notice all the blood and injures, they were making him feel queasy. He'll come to when he's ready, get him back up to the school, help him get clean. Severus told him. Why don't you do it? Ron asked, taken aback. It's over, there's no need to hide. Severus glanced around, black eyes taking in everything, and realized Ronald was quite correct. The few remaining Death Eaters, that were viciously fighting for their lives, were soon to be dispatched by the might and determination of the Vendicatory. Go on then, Severus informed Ron with a jerk of his head, gesturing towards the school. Kneeling down before his husband, "Come on, let's get you back into the castle, wash you up, all sure Willow has missed you." He got a stirring at the name of the daughter, but he wasn't quite out of the shock yet. "Go on what?" Ron asked, watching as Severus eased Harry to his feet, scooping up Harry's wand as he did so. The blood had gotten all over him, it was so bad they honestly didn't know what was Voldemort's and what might be Harry. "Go get them, use Dobby once you get to the room, inform Dobby to come to my quarters," Severus ordered. He wanted his daughter close to him and he knew Harry would too. He probably should thank the Vendicatory, but he did not. Oh, he couldn't deny a deep curiosity as to why they came. Why they'd chosen to help them when it was clear nobody wanted to aid the UK in the menace that was Voldemort. Then again, most magical societies took care of their own problems, the only one that had become a collective problem was Grindelwald. That's only because he hadn't stuck to one community. He'd wreaked havoc all over, Muggle and magical societies. They had to have been watching, waiting for the right moment to help, to strike. He was nonetheless grateful. Adriano had saved his life, any further and that spell would have rendered him near fatally injured or dead. Either way, they had come, and the British magical community owed them. The Order alone wouldn't have beaten back Voldemort's forces, not even with the teachers and students pitching in once the wards were down. With that thought, Severus began to maneuver Harry around the sea of dead bodies. Students and Death Eaters alike. His own agony ignored, he'd take something the second he was back in his own quarters and send up everything he'd made in preparation to Poppy. The smell of burning flesh penetrated his nose, causing him and Ron to glance back. They found the Vendicatory burning Voldemort's remains. It was a good idea, Severus should have thought of that, there were rituals one could use. "Get the remains of the rest of the Riddles burnt and banished," ordered Amadeus, the leader of the Vendicatory. That was the final piece to prevent anyone from bringing Voldemort back. It was disrespectful to do so, but it required the necessary sacrifice to prevent another return. "Yes, sir," came the youngest looking of them, before he or she apparated away. Severus turned back and resumed getting Harry back to Hogwarts. "What can I do to help him?" Ron asked. He'd never really had to deal with shock before. "After he's had a calming draft, he should be all right," Severus reassured Ron, still getting used to the fact that his husband was so much older than his best friends when legally they were the same age. It would always remain the case, too, it didn't matter how much Harry changed. Normally it isn't advisable to move someone who's in shock, especially if they may be injured, but he had to move him. He didn't want him hit with any stray spells, despite how the fights were contained anything could happen. Ron nodded dumbly. After a 20-minute walk Ron and Severus split up, Harry going with Severus towards the dungeons and Ron bolted towards the ROR. Both ignored all clusters of students, Severus blatantly ignoring his Slytherins caused a lot of confusion on that front. "Professor?" Pansy Parkinson asked, staring after her teacher in shock. Not just because he was guiding Potter to the damn dungeons but because, well, Potter also added to the fact he was clearly ignoring every single one of them. He'd never done that before in her 7 years here. "Not ever." "Professor," she added against with a lot of indignation in her tone. Draco touched her arm to draw her back, to back away from their head of house. Whirling around, Severus stared at the 17-year-olds coldly, disappointment and disgust prominent. A few years ago, if they were younger, he would have understood their reluctance not to join. However, they were 17, they knew right from wrong, and even he at that point had decided once and for all. "Yes," he sneered, his disapproval cutting deep. Some of his Slytherins were out there, along with Hufflepuffs, Ravenclaws and Gryffindors. They hadn't all let him down. He should have known better than to think for a minute that they would tell someone, do something to help. He had seen at least 3 Slytherins dive into the train. He would have to inform parents that they had lost children. These Slytherins had nothing to lose, well, they'd probably lost their parents. The Vendicatory had made sure they all died. He wondered if being a coward was better than them being dead. Shaking his head, he turned and wordlessly walked away from them. They would just have to live with the consequences of their actions. He thought tiredly, he could do no more for them, they were already graduated. Ron stalked across the hallway 3 times, before being granted access to the room of requirements. The sight of Hermione cooing at Willow set his heart racing. A small smile appearing on his face, he couldn't wait until the day came where it would be their child, she was soothing. A vision punching the breath out of him. What's wrong? Ron rushed to their side, seeing the look on Hermione's face. It wasn't one he was familiar with enough to decipher. He was positive there was some sort of worry. Hermione, what is it? It wasn't as though she was paying any attention to him, or even realized he was there, judging by the way she jumped at his sudden appearance. I'm pregnant, Hermione admitted, staring up at Ron, looking so very torn. They'd been so careful. She'd wanted to make a career for herself first, before having a family. Her parents had done the opposite, had her first then a career. Maybe she could do both. But Ron wanted to be an Auror. It was full-time. How could they manage? Then let's not forget Ron wasn't exactly the most adult wizard about. What? Ron croaked breathlessly, eyes wide before scrambling to get the ring he'd had concealed in his pocket for months and months. My own, will you do me the honor of being my wife? Showing her the ring he'd chosen. Well, he'd had Harry's help, but in the end, he'd chosen it and would be paying for it. Where did you get that? Hermione stared wide-eyed at the ring, her fingers brushing against the band. Ron knew her well. It wasn't gaudy or massive, but it was beautifully crafted and it had diamonds in it. Ron wouldn't be able to afford something like that. It wasn't just silver. It was platinum, she knew, because she'd been working with platinum for Voldemort's cuffs. Oh, my God, is everyone okay? She blurted out. Ron didn't mind the deviation. He loved her. They're alive, he reassured her immediately, juggling the ring about as if to say, well, what's your answer, so to say? They're both going to be just fine. Not telling her the death tally, which was probably quite numerous. He didn't even know the exact numbers himself. He almost teared up just remembering how many of the younger students had made for the train. They hadn't deserved what happened to them. They were just as bad as the Slytherins for keeping silent on what was going down. If everyone had known, they would have all hidden behind the wards, kept safe. Harry and Severus had more to lose than anyone else, and would put their daughter before everyone else. He couldn't blame them, for he'd do the exact same when it came to Hermione. He knew he would have done the same if the roles were reversed. As he stared at Willow, yeah, damn right he understood, even if he didn't like it much. Ron, Hermione called out, frowning. I said yes, do I have to put it on myself? She teased once she realized Ron was back with her. Ron's face beamed full of delight. They were really already engaged. This was just making it official. It would have taken years for him to be able to afford a proper ring. Especially one that Hermione actually deserved. By years, he meant because they'd not only have rent to pay on a property but food and things on a crap salary. He wouldn't get much until he actually became an Auror, and as he stayed there the salary would go up. Ron slid the ring onto her finger. His fiancée, he could say that now with proof. They would need to have a quick engagement, maybe a wedding before she started showing. Waiting wouldn't be a good idea. She'd be judged 9 ways to Sunday. He probably should have waited. Who wants to celebrate their engagement on the day Voldemort died? Those days weren't all important. The day they married was definitely more important, and they'd choose a good day. Leaning forward, he said her chastely. Thank you, he murmured. Adoration adorned his face. He might not have gotten everything he saw in the mirror, but he'd gotten the best thing he hadn't imagined at 11. Hermione, come on, Severus and Harry want to see Willow. I think he should be finished cleaning off by now. Ron explained. Dobby. Hermione smiled a little at Ron's words. He'd actually called Professor Snape Severus. His given name, after spending the entire year calling him Snape. Severus continued to guide Harry down to his quarters, dwelling on how utterly disappointed he was in his students. It was quite disgusting how they'd just remained inside of the castle instead of helping. If their parents had seen them, it would have made them stop, although whether it would have saved their lives he honestly couldn't say. The Vindicatori weren't exactly the most forgiving of creatures, from all that was known about them, which wasn't a lot. He dreaded finding out just how many students had passed, how many of the teachers were now gone. Voldemort was gone for good, and so were the bulk of his followers. He should feel relief, happiness. He had survived. Harry and his daughter had survived. The most important people to him. Could it just be a transference of the shock through the bond? Or was he in his own mild shock? He nor Harry had expected it to get as messy as this, or any of the students to be in danger. They'd assumed Harry and Ron would be apparated out of there, safeguarding the students, but no. Had Voldemort suspected him? Was that why plans had changed? Or had Voldemort just decided last second he wanted Hogwarts too? He supposed the lack of Aurors with only a few teachers would have been inciting for the wizard who had made no secret of his love and desire to have Hogwarts as his own. He didn't suppose it mattered now, he thought in defeat. The war was over, all they could do was recover. Right now, his only concern was his husband, who was practically catatonic in his arms. Using his magic, he opened his quarters, before slamming the door shut with his foot. "Come on, let's get you bathed, you're covered in blood," Severus informed him, leading him immediately through to the bathroom. Thankfully he had basic potions in his bathroom cabinet, which he grabbed a hold of immediately. Before reluctantly putting it down in the sink, as he began the bath. Then proceeded to undress the blood-drenched wizard. "Merlin," Severus muttered, "did the Dark Lord lose all his blood all over Harry?" "What happened?" he asked Harry softly, hand wildly and blindly looking for the potion as he gazed at his husband. Finally, his hand grasped around the thick glass vial, opening the cork. He eased Harry's head back and helped him swallow the potion. Rubbing his neck to ensure Harry did indeed swallow the calming draught and not choke on it. "He attacked me," Harry murmured, his voice so low that Severus wouldn't have heard him if he wasn't so close. "He actually attacked me." Severus narrowed his eyes at the word, attack, physically. That still didn't explain all the blood. It was almost as if Harry had bathed in it, even his hair was caked in the now dried fluid. "After I got the cuffs on him," Harry nodded, blinking blearily, but much more coherent than he had been moments ago. "I wasn't expecting that," he admitted wryly, "not from someone like Voldemort who reviled all things Muggle." "What did Salazar always tell you?" Severus snorted, shaking his head, as he wiped off as much of the blood as he could. "Never underestimate your opponent, I know," Harry sighed resignedly, batting Severus' hand away. "He was capable of washing himself, thank you. He's going to be on mic. For it for months, isn't it?" "Months. You now underestimate Salazar's boredom," Severus laughed a little, shaking his head. "Try years. Now go on. Get in." Clearly Harry was beginning to feel more like himself now, and would more than likely be able to wash himself. He sat himself on the toilet, grabbed the potions kit, and began to see to his own injuries. "I'll do it, just give me a few minutes," Harry told Severus, wincing at the state of his chest. Scrubbing vigorously, trying to get every single piece of blood off him. From head to foot, the clothes were only good for the bin now. The t-shirt was fully red, not a speck of white on it at all. It's not like they'd be wearing school uniform again. "Take your time, I'm fine, tell me what happened," Severus asked, as he cleaned the area, sanitized it before spreading a salve across the wound before pressing dressing on it. This was as close to coddling as either of them got with one another. Neither were used to it, thus felt uncomfortable with too much babying. Harry squeezed shower gel onto his hands and began to scrub his body up and down. It was surprisingly easy to get the cuffs on. Once they were on, "I expected Voldemort to collapse, I mean Dumbledore did." Severus hummed. "Dumbledore's much older and more in need of his magic," he guessed. "I don't know about that. Voldemort used his magic to return from beyond spirit form. You'd think it was important enough that without it, he would have crumbled," Harry commented, watching Severus wash himself using the sink. "Obviously not," Severus murmured, grimacing. "Looks like he'd need help after all." He could feel an open wound on his back. "That's Ron and Hermione here with our daughter." Good. Harry relaxed further, knowing his daughter really safe, and by some horror hadn't been found at Hogwarts. He didn't know if anyone had gotten into Hogwarts or not. His focus had entirely been on the battle. Standing up, he wrapped a towel around himself, and dried his hands, making a silent gesture for the salve as he cleaned up the wound on Severus' back. Curse or spell? Wincing at the state of it, yeah, he was lucky indeed, he barely had any wounds at all. I cannot feel any remnants of magic, I do believe it's just a spell. Severus grimaced and hissed at the touch no matter how light it was. You're right, cutting curse, Harry murmured, his touch light and apologetic. Once he had cleaned it thoroughly, and made sure there was no debris, he put the salve on. Any other injuries? His eyes trailing down his back, buttocks and legs, he couldn't see any obvious signs of another injury. Although the worst of the injuries were always the invisible ones. Curses and hexes they couldn't see or fix. I don't think so, Severus sighed, relaxing as Harry put a large waterproof plaster over the wound. Keeping it sterile while the wound healed, the salve had already begun to work, he could feel the pain abating a bit and time. There, he murmured, pressing a K.S. to Severus' should blade. Swallowing thickly, eyes closed, he just remained standing there. I never want to go through anything like that again. No, Severus agreed, nor I. The fear he'd had for his daughter had been echoing constantly through their bond since they walked away from her, leaving her with Hermione safe as could be. The fear for each other had taken over when the plan went to hell, but after that things had become a little blurred as they fought for their lives, immersed in the guilt that each death that happened here was on them. Even if it wasn't what they'd originally wanted or planned. They'd meant to keep them all safe. Dobby. What can Dobby do for masters? Retrieve some clothes for us, and make some refreshments, Severus ordered Dobby, his body shaking with the strain of remaining upright. Quickly. Dobby didn't answer, he popped away, immediately afterwards. Sit back down, before you fall, Harry sighed, nudging him towards the toilet, while he himself sat on the edge of the tub. We're going to have to leave, not be seen for at least a year or so. Severus stared blankly at his husband, it screamed, why? Harry chuckled, the glamour, he grimaced, pressing his hands to his ribs. Ah, very well, Severus murmured, it cannot hurt to have the house fully functional and ready to move in instead of doing it ourselves. Now we've gotten well off topic, what happened to the Dark Lord? Amadeus threw something at me when Voldemort tried to choke the life out of me. Harry shrugged, not surprised to feel Severus prodding and touching at his inflamed neck. Merlin, it slid through his neck like butter, the blooming look of surprise spread across his face. Would one day amuse him, but right now he just wanted to rest. To forget what had happened. Severus nodded, yes, I'm not surprised their blades were easily and swiftly detaching one's head from their bodies. I put it down to strength and spells they have imbued on their blades. It looks like I owe him one. Can't hurt to always have something like that on your person though, Harry murmured, it had saved his life after all. No, it certainly can't, Severus agreed. Inhaling sharply, how many people do you think? Clothes popped into the room, as the smell of coffee and chamomile tea began to drift through the door. No, Severus retorted immediately, those deaths are not on you. Lay the blame directly where it belongs. With them. It was their fault they had not listened and ran for the damn school. He knew he was being disingenuous really, they'd been scared, terrified children trying to get to safety, not yet teenagers. Here, passing over comfortable baggy clothes, they needed something comfortable to wear tonight. Can you check Ron's leg over? It was sliced off earlier and I reattached it, I want to be sure it's been reattached properly. He wasn't by any means a healer, thank goodness Salazar and Helga trained him a little though, so he could. Otherwise Ron would have lost his leg or worse his life. Of course, Severus agreed, no doubt Poppy would be working well into the night, she would never prioritize Ron over the other more severely injured students. Of which there were many, he thought darkly, recalling the bodies laying out unconscious or dead across the lawn of Hogwarts. Here, let me help, Harry murmured, helping to ease Severus into the black jumper, a loose-fitting one he'd not seen since their training days in the chamber. His own was much less baggy than before. You need the most rest out of both of us, he said, eyes shadowed, he could feel the pain Severus was in. A few potions and I'll be just fine. Severus did exactly that, downing 2 additional potions, before putting the vials and wrappers from the bandages and plasters into the bin. A year, where exactly do you wish to go? I didn't think that far, I've never been out of the country so I guess I won't be able to go through Muggle means. Harry said, with a frown. He'd never thought he'd survive to go on holidays really. What about you? Is there anywhere you'd like to visit? Only a long list, Severus said wryly, but his responsibilities prevented that, and now he had a whole different responsibility. His daughter and husband, whom he'd give up his holiday wish list for in a heartbeat. Muggle or magical? Harry asked. As they exited the bathroom, Harry made a beeline for his daughter, and picked her up. Holding her close, inhaling her sweet baby scent, Merlin, he'd missed her so much. The urge to tighten his hold on her was so strong, but he didn't. I'm never going to let you go ahead. He breathed into her hair, leaning his head against Severus' chest, who was as always drawn into his orbit, just as Harry himself was ever drawn into Severus' orbit. How was she? Severus questioned, fingers delicately stroking against her peaceful sleeping face. She ate an hour ago. She's mostly slept, Hermione said, doe-eyed as she looked at Willow as if she was the most beautiful thing in the world. Which leg? Severus questioned Ron, staring at the boy in question. This one. Ron patted his thigh delicately, knowing what Severus was asking. He wasn't as stupid as everyone liked to make him out to be compared to his brothers. Any numbness? Severus asked. Set to do the spell. Not really, just weird, Ron admitted. It's like pins and needles of sorts. Trying his best to describe the feelings currently going through his leg. Severus relaxed. That's good, it's the blood rushing through the veins. Casting the spell, knowing that it would more than likely be healed, Harry had done a good job. Within a few moments, his thoughts were confirmed. It's been reattached perfectly. Helga will be proud of you. Harry sighed softly, grateful for that at least. He'd convinced himself he'd ed up his best friend's leg. They'd been amidst a battle for Merlin's sake, so his focus hadn't been exactly 100% focused on the injury. Good, I'm glad, he murmured, smuggling into the sofa with his daughter, leaving room for Severus to join him. He was feeling very clingy right now. He wanted his husband next to him and his daughter, just close, that's all. It wasn't too much to ask for. You're engaged, Severus observed, as always, missing nothing, and definitely not missing the feelings coming through the bond. Removing the throw from the back of the sofa, he joined his husband and wrapped them all up, putting pillows to lessen the strain of Harry holding their daughter and keep her safely ensconced between them. Wait, what? Harry asked, head jerking up. Really? You finally did it? He asked, grinning like a loony tick. Nothing in his demeanor indicated he was just in battle less than an hour ago. Willow will have a little cousin to play with close in age, Ron confessed, eyes bright and alight with desire and happiness. What about your career goals? Severus arched a brow, genuinely curious about what she planned on doing. Well, I'm going to take the year off, a gap year. After that, I'll ease myself into it, see if I can do it. Hermione confessed, but there was no hesitance in her voice. She'd already made up her mind. Ron's going to be busy this year anyway, learning to be an Auror. Severus snorted. I still say you should join the chess circuit. You could make hundreds of millions of galleons a year and you'd be gone for a few hours each day and Portkey home by evening. And it wouldn't be every day. You didn't say it was hundreds of millions, Ron choked. He'd mentioned that Ron should look into it, that he'd do well in the chess circuit but nothing else. Nobody was insane enough to pay someone that amount for playing chess, were they? It's one of the biggest tournaments we have, along with the dueling tournament. Yes, the winner can take up to hundreds of thousands of galleons. The smaller tournaments you take away 50 galleons, and as you go up the board the amount increases. Yes, people make a lot of money doing it. And you could more or less become a stay-at-home father, Harry said, watching Ron's face pale and go steadily redder. It is not an insult, Harry stated firmly, noticing his friend's raising ire. Have care what you're about to say next. Giving Ron a look. He and Severus were both men. One of them would be the primary caretaker of their daughter. There was nothing wrong with a father staying at home to look after their child. It was preposterous just how backwards the magical world thought. Indeed, Hermione murmured stern-faced, just waiting for the thoughtless words of, women are the ones taking care of kids, men bring back the bacon, although, both her parents had worked all their lives, and she hoped she and Ron could be like them. Ron snapped his mouth closed. He knew better than to begin an argument he'd never win. Plus, whether he liked him now or not, Snape was downright scary. Nor did it escape his notice just how protectively feral Harry's face was. Actually, it was scarier than Snape. I wasn't going to say anything like that. He lied through his teeth, face flushing red at the look of disbelief on everyone's face. Well, not like others would mean it, he mumbled in embarrassment. Both parents can have a career, Ron. Hermione's parents were capable of it. The only reason your mum stayed home was because there was so many of you guys and because it's obviously what she genuinely wanted to do. And that they couldn't afford a single childcare placement, let alone the rest they inevitably needed. Molly and Arthur would no doubt be very happy to look after their grandchild for the day while you both focus on your careers. Severus pointed out, he didn't need to know them to know this without a doubt. And the Grangers. Hermione smiled. My mum and dad did cut their hours down, they're not working quite so much anymore. Although, I think they'll be traveling soon. Enjoying their lives while they were still capable of doing whatever they wanted now that she was all grown up and didn't need them quite so much. Speaking of traveling, so will we, Harry said softly, staring down lovingly at his daughter, overwhelmed with the love he felt for her. She was so beautiful and tiny, and so very worth the pain he'd endured to have her. What do you mean? Ron frowned. Because of the glamour. Hermione deduced. Harry looked grown up, older, more sophisticated, well, not in the clothes he currently wore. Some time away from the public, then coming back would be less of a shock than him being seen now. The time bubble was illegal. Without Voldemort, no doubt Harry didn't want to risk being arrested. You're not becoming an Auror? Ron wondered. No, definitely not. They'd discussed it in the past, but evidently Ron must have thought he'd changed his mind. Either that or he hadn't been paying attention, which was exactly like Ron. His mind wandered often. You'll do it though, Ron, if that's what you really want to do. He had when they were 11, the desire to be better than all his siblings, but was it something Ron really wanted to do still? I don't know, I mean that battle was bloody intense, Ron admitted. He'd felt adrift, too terrified to use spells in case he hurt someone else other than his target. What kind of Auror would he make? Hermione rubbed Ron's back, soothing the wizard. Where do you plan on going? A cruise. Harry glanced at Severus, just choosing where to go. Instead of having an itinerary set. That would be preferable, yes, Severus nodded. There were always places in which people had no interest in those sorts of packages. Cruises and such, yes, they were always islands you didn't care for. There are quite a few islands I'd love to visit, he admitted. Harry smiled. Potion ingredients, not needing to deduce further. Not just. The history has always fascinated me also, Severus admitted, but first and foremost it was indeed the potion ingredients he could get. To buy them, cost a fortune, and yes, they were worth it, but he'd love to take some and grow them at home. I would very much like to grow them in the solarium. Which by the way, was massive, bigger than their and their daughter's bedrooms put together. Severus definitely had plans for their home. A place that he and Harry had built from the ground up with their own specifications. It hadn't belonged to anyone else, they would make their own memories. No portraits, no previous owners, it was going to be wonderful. You're not going to stay away the whole year, are you? Ron wondered. Yes, but you can come visit us and we will visit you. There's a thing called portkey or apparating or flow. Harry teased him. They were never going to be far from each other. And the mirror, Hermione reminded them, you deserve this. You'll need to be very quick if you want to go to keep the anonymity. Perhaps inform the ministry of where you want to go, close to your destination but not the actual one. Otherwise you'll have the press following you relentlessly. That's a given. Severus agreed somberly. He already had plans formulating in his mind. He would need to find out exactly where Harry wanted to go, divvy it up so that they each went to a location they wanted to see, and if there were ones they both wished to see together, all the better. They will be relentless, including with you, to try and get our locations out of you. Hermione frowned. I didn't think of that, she admitted in annoyance. Of course they would, why wouldn't they? It's just the sort of thing the press would do. They were children, still at Hogwarts, but the second they left, they would lose that protection and privacy that the school afforded them. Don't worry, wherever you're staying, I'll pay for a ward master to secure the house, Harry reassured her, it was for all their protection. The burrow has all the necessary wards up. Ron easily reassured Harry that he didn't need to spend his money. Harry pursed his lips, watching Hermione's face. Oh, Ron wasn't going to like what he had to hear next. We won't be staying at the burrow, Hermione said, at least I won't be. He was not living with Molly Weasley. She was easy enough to handle in small doses, but every day. Trying to tell her how to live her life. What to eat, how to cook, how to look after her, little boy, while telling her to fetch this, and fetch that, no way. Christ, he'd rather stay at her parents'. My parents are giving me full access to my bank now that I'm an adult, which they've been putting money into since I was a child. My trust fund, I suppose you could call it. There's enough there for us to buy a house or rent a place until we are both working. And then some, but Ron was never going to get access to it, he'd go crazy having money to spend. But we could save that, and just stay, Ron protested, keep the money for what mattered. I'm not living at the burrow, I love your parents, Ron, but I want my own place. Hermione said firmly, praying they weren't going to get into an argument. Ron wanted to protest again, but, unless you'd like to live at my parents'. Hermione abruptly suggested, yes, that's a good idea, we'd save money that way too. Suddenly Ron understood. No, your idea is a good one, he suddenly vehemently agreed, nodding. I thought as much, Hermione said smugly. Harry and Severus glanced at each other, eyes gleaming with tired merriment. That's the grounds cleared up. Salazar entered the portrait and began speaking. Everyone's resting in the Great Hall. Those that have passed are in the hospital wing, and Minerva is gathering a list of people who are missing. How many are in the hospital wing? Harry asked, closing his eyes, merriment dying in seconds of hearing Salazar's words. Not noticing Helga and Rowena joining Salazar. It's been cornered off, the dead are in the isolation ward, the main ward is filled with those with battle injuries, Helga explained, somber. 15 children have been placed in the isolation ward. Eyes gleaming with coldness, she'd built the school with the others to save children, not see them killed. If I could, I would reach through this portrait and have killed Voldemort myself, oath be damned. She would have been saving lives anyway by dealing with that piece of crap who called himself a wizard. 15, Harry said, stomach rebelling, opening his eyes to see them just as angry and disgusted as him. 15 people just gone, that's the ones they knew off, those who had died in the train, they didn't know yet. If it's any consolation, they died protecting the younger students, Helga murmured, knowing it wasn't any consolation at all. They will always be remembered. Harry scoffed, right, sure they will, for all of 5 minutes, he stated bitterly, then everyone will bury their heads in the sand. Forget all the bad, and go about their lives as if nothing had happened at all. Except those who knew them and their families, Severus reminded him. He was grateful that his family had made it out alive, and he couldn't even begin to imagine what those families will be going through. Staring at his daughter, no, it was inconceivable really. We will remember them. We will remind them of the cost of their freedom and continued good lives. Harry nodded grimly, he would do more than that if he had his way. The faculty. Severus questioned the founders. The students in the train survived. Godric appeared in the portrait, along with the professor babbling. She used a rune to create a portal in time. Other than a few burns, the students and professors that entered the train are alive and well. Portal or portals? Harry asked, wide-eyed and impressed. Portals, Godric said, nodding sagely, impressed himself. That will have taken a whole lot of magic, Harry said, awed, relieved that the first years were alive and well. Wow, just wow. I had no idea she was quite so powerful, Severus confessed. Runes don't take much power, Ron pointed out, confused by their awe, even Hermione. Most runes don't, no, but portals require constant magical usage. To have created multiple portals, she'll have sapped up a great deal of her own magic to protect and save them. Hermione admitted, if they'd been left open, it would have meant they'd have died anyway, so she must have closed them just in time to. Oh, Ron making an oh in surprise. It's the sort of power you'd use with over 3 hours of constant dueling with extremely difficult magical spells. Severus informed Ron, in a way the boy would most assuredly understand. Will she recover? That sort of magic sapling for someone unused to it, it could affect their magical core. She's taken a few potions and is having a hot chocolate as we speak while her magic recuperates. Nobody will know for a few days. Salazar replied, considering it's only been an hour or so, I'd say she's taken the potion in time to replenish her magical core, with a little luck anyway. I really should go and see to my Slytherins. Severus sighed, but it was very grudging. He was very disappointed in them. In the actions they had taken today had showcased their greed, their inability to care about anyone other than themselves. They'll get one hell of a wake-up call when they return home, Salazar said grimly. Merlin helped them, because nobody else is going to. It's a good job they're 17, otherwise their lives would be worse, living in an orphanage until they could access their money and estate. Rowena kindly reminded them, many have lost both their parents. Most people thought all the Death Eaters were men. The reality was quite different. Thankfully most of the couples were childless, but others weren't quite so lucky, including Pansy Parkinson. Severus grimaced. Indeed, he murmured, the only downside to the Vendicatory dealing with every single Death Eater by killing them. It was truly the only way to end the war for good, to deal with every single one of them so that nobody was tempted to take over from the Dark Lord Voldemort or worse, try to bring him back. When will everyone be going home? Hermione wondered. Technically they were supposed to already be on the journey home from Hogwarts for the last time. I'd imagine Minerva will keep everyone at Hogwarts for tonight unless they wish to return home with their parents. Those with spouses will already know that their husbands are dead, and will be no doubt notified by Gringotts and thus the Ministry soon enough. Severus sighed. He wouldn't be all that surprised if Narcissa came for her son very soon. At least Lucius had ensured Draco would know how to run the entirety of Malfoy estate. For Narcissa wouldn't be able to access it, except for the no doubt generous allowance she would get as Lucius' widow. Is my mum and dad still at Hogwarts? Ron asked the founders. I couldn't say, Godric admitted. It wasn't as if he knew them after all. Do you want me to find out? It's okay, I'll go and find them, Ron told him, smiling in thanks. I have some good news I want to tell them anyway. It certainly will. Harry grinned wryly. She's going to try and take over everything. He'd never forgive Molly or Arthur for their part in what almost happened to him, but he'd be cordial at least. Oh, this isn't the good news Ron wants to brag about. Hermione laughed. He just wants to tell someone we're expecting. Yes, another boy in the family, Ron said, beaming with sheer delight. Harry arched a brow. A boy. You already know the doubtful. The Weasleys always have boys, Ron shrugged, so of course, he would think boy. As do the Potter and Princes, Severus pointed out, with his mother being the only exception in years. I guess, Ron murmured, brow furrowing as he thought about it. The Weasleys and Prewetts were known for boys, it was so rare to have girls. A girl, hell, he wouldn't know what the hell to do if he had a girl. They were so different to boys, he didn't understand them. Would you be disappointed? Hermione questioned. It wasn't as if the Weasley name depended on him. The head of the Weasley family would be Bill once his father died, then Bill's firstborn. If they had an estate it would be important, but they didn't. They were just a family always struggling to get by. The estate was long gone. No, Ron said, shaking his head, vividly imagining a girl that looked like Hermione with a shocking head of fizzy red hair. A goofy smile appearing on his face as he thought about it. Definitely not. Harry snorted in amusement as Severus hid his smirk and eye-roll in his daughter's midnight black hair. That was such a horrendous look. He prayed he never looked like that a day in his life. Hermione and Ron left soon afterwards in an attempt to track down Arthur and Molly. To not only reveal the good news, but to ensure that they were alive and well. Ron shuddered just remembering his father falling. We did it, Harry sighed, once they were alone. He loved Ron and Hermione, don't get him wrong, but he just wanted to be alone with his husband. We did, Severus murmured quietly, both of them too exhausted to celebrate in any way whatsoever. Plus, Harry was no doubt still sore from giving birth to their daughter to desire any passionate way they could celebrate if they'd had the ability. Rest now, it's over. Bringing his husband and daughter closer. It didn't take Harry long at all to fall asleep. Severus levitated them both to the bedroom. Their daughter going into the bassinet that he'd ordered months ago. Harry into their bed. He levitated the bassinet closer to the edge of the bed. She would likely sleep until she woke up for food, which Dobby could provide for her for once. They would never get in the habit of using Dobby for everything. Their child would not grow up being tended to by a house elf like the old families did. Once in a while wouldn't hurt though. Once he was sure they were comfortable, Severus used magic to transform his clothes into his normal wear. Wincing at the feel of the abrasive material against his damaged skin, he persevered through it, and left his quarters. Soundly, leaving Dobby to watch of his husband and daughter. He was going to speak to Minerva and then he was off to get a portkey and begin their holiday destination. Hopefully by this time tomorrow, they would be in a sunnier climate, enjoying their well-deserved holiday. When they returned, if they returned, there was going to be a lot of unhappy people. After all, they'd find a much-changed Harry Potter, whom was married to the ex-potions master and had a daughter to boot. Yes, it would drive them all crazy. The newspapers were going to go into a feeding frenzy but he didn't care. He had Harry and their daughter, he was content with his life. The press could go to hell for all he cared. The plan that Severus and Harry had started out for leaving for a year turned into 3. Officially nobody had seen or heard from Harry and Severus in those 3 years, but the reality was Harry and Severus returned to visit Hermione and Ron. Usually met in the house that Severus and Harry had built for their own. Every time they returned, dozens of plants and herbs were placed in the solarium and flourished from each region they visited. As for Remus, well, Harry always went a portkey to their location, and Remus visited for a week at a time. He was loved dearly by Willow who loved her granddad. "I'll see you in a few minutes," Harry murmured softly, sing Severus on his lips, before drawing back, their son safely ensconced in their arms, merely 6 months old. In Severus' arms their daughter slept in the crook of his neck. Severus nodded, a grimace on his face. He was definitely not looking forward to this at all. He'd not had to put up with anyone except Remus, who he had more than learned to merely tolerate, in 3 years. Now he was going to be enduring the entire Weasley clan, both married and blood. Harry sniggered. "I promise it won't be long," he said, aware that his husband just wasn't very sociable at all. "I'll hold you to it," Severus murmured, tightening his hold on his 3-year-old daughter. He and Harry had made an executive decision to return to the British Isles. To continue to raise their daughter and son on a nomad lifestyle wasn't suitable long-term. They didn't want their children to end up unable to make friends in future. So, they would return to Britain and settle down. He just wished it wasn't the Burrow that would be their first stop. "Harriet, no running," Ginny scolded her 3-year-old, her lips pursed. "Merlin, help her," she hated her life. She thought that with Dumbledore dead things would have been easier, but no. Then her eyes widened dramatically. "What the hell is that?" she asked, staring at Harry, who had just portkeyed in shock. Seeing proof that Harry had slept with someone else, and it had borne fruit, was disheartening and angering in equal measures. He was tanned, he looked older, handsome, and Merlin, he was making her drool. He had aged very well indeed. "Harry, it's good to see you, man," Ron said, making his way outside, clapping him on the shoulder with a wide grin. "How's everyone? And you'd think you'd know the sight of a baby when you saw one." Ginny, rolling his eyes at his sister. Their relationship had never truly recovered, but he loved his nieces. Harry smirked. "We're all good. How's Hermione?" "She's doing well, already up and about. You know how stubborn she is," Ron said, shaking his head fondly. "Hugo is inside. He can't wait to meet his Uncle Harry." "Is Willow and Sev coming?" Hermione asked, making an appearance with the aforementioned little boy in her arms. She wouldn't be surprised if Severus decided not to come. The Burrow was packed with family and children. Definitely not his scene, no matter how much he loved his own children. "Who's that?" Ginny asked, scooping her daughter up, her gaze never leaving Harry's. She'd been utterly dismayed when the ministry had given her a year-long restraining order to prevent her from contacting Harry, which had been reinstated twice since then. He hadn't done it this time though, maybe because Dumbledore was finally dead. "You didn't tell her?" Harry asked, more amused than he had a right to be. Then again, the press didn't know a damn thing about him being married or his children's births. The beauty of home births, so to speak, meant he was able to register his children at Gringotts, which didn't allow anyone to find their birth certificates, which are public domain in the ministry. Gringotts took their security very seriously. Ron just gave him a look. Are you nuts? I didn't even tell the rest of the family, he said dryly. Tell me what? Ginny screeched, causing her daughter to slap her hands over her ears from the pain of it. Ginny still lived at the Burrow with her 2 daughters. The rest of her siblings were all married, to either their jobs or people, and had places of their own and families. I knew this was a mistake, Severus sighed, as Willow was awoken quite rudely, but the screeching, looking rather confused until she caught sight of Ron and Hermione. Rose, she said gleefully, already trying to wiggle down out of her father's hold. Remember what we told you. Severus turned his daughter's attention to himself. Her beautiful face had the prince characteristics, including black hair but with a cute button nose, thank Merlin, and Harry's green eyes. She was a stunning mixture of both of them. She was just as tan as her father's. Her brother though was very pale, as they naturally kept him out of the sun. Willow nodded, green eyes blinking excitedly. I won't go by myself. Anywhere on your own, yes, Severus said fondly. Kay, sing her on the forehead, ignoring the gaping he could feel from everyone around him. Go on then, he murmured, letting her down. Not that she could go far. Severus and Harry were too paranoid, and knew where she was every second of the day. They also had alerts up if she left a certain radius. They needn't have been concerned since Rose and Willow made a beeline for inside, where Rose had a tea party all set up with all her toys that had been brought here with them. What are you doing here? Ginny asked disgustedly. This is a family gathering. I see you still haven't changed, Mrs. Dumbledore, Severus said laconically. It's Weasley. I went back to my maiden name. Ginny sniped back. Turning back inside she called out, Mum. This is meant to be a family gathering. What is it, Ginny, dear? Molly asked, her voice strained as if she was tired. Why did you invite Snape? She whined at her mother. Severus, here, Molly asked, sounding confused, bustling out. She blinked. Oh. Severus, everyone has been rather worried about you. Nobody has seen you for 3 years. A single letter could have assuaged your concerns, Severus informed her wryly, but nothing had come. Not surprising really, he hadn't made any attempts to endear himself to anyone. You resigned. We simply thought you wished to be alone, Molly admitted. Come in. Come in. We've heard about your latest exploits. Bill is in awe of your latest creations. Mum, Ginny screeched in annoyance. Ginny, I'd like to introduce you to my husband, Harry said wickedly, and my daughter Willow and my son, Aspen. No surprise there, it had turned out to be another tree. Aspen Ashton Black Potter Snape. The stunned silence that followed was just as amusing. The last time we saw you both, you could barely tolerate one another. How did it happen? Bill asked, eyeing Willow, trying to gauge her age. It must have been very quick. Willow was it. Looks around. Rose's age. Willow's a little older than Rose, Harry commented. We left together, letting them draw their own conclusions. Only Hermione and Ron would ever know the truth, and they would die before revealing it. I heard you have children of your own, Severus commented, looking as if it physically hurt. Harry laughed, his gaze seeking out his daughter, smiling at the sight of Rose and Willow playing with a few other children he didn't recognize. With cups of teas, whispering to their teddies and eating the cookies in the middle of the blanket. Yes, they were making the right decision to come back here. He has. Molly beamed in utter pride despite her tiredness. The twins had been up since 6 o'clock today. A daughter Victoire, a second daughter Dominique, and a son Louis. After so long of only having sons, the Weasley family was flourishing with girls, and she couldn't have been happier to have a lot of girls in the family. There were pictures of all of them all over the place, and naturally they had a place of pride on her new clock, which was bigger and better, a gift from all her children and daughter-in-laws at Christmas. They had a new family member to place on it now. She just wished Ginny would take more responsibility for her children now that she was older. What do you mean you're married? Ginny finally found her voice. He was meant to marry her now that Dumbledore was gone and she was officially widowed. We just celebrated our 3rd anniversary, Harry explained. Perhaps now Ginny would get it. Bonded, not married, Severus corrected her, smirking viciously. Harry was his and would never be hers. They would always be connected. Harry would never be able to bond or marry another. They were in this for life. May I? Molly asked, peering at the little boy in Harry's arms, eyes gleaming wetly. Oh, Harry, I'm so happy for you. She could see that he was happy. She'd thought that sort of happiness was what he wanted with Ginny. Harry stared at Molly for a few moments before he handed over his son. I'm forgiving you, was declared wordlessly between them. Beaming in delight, Molly relaxed a little, and began immediately cooing over the little boy. You're supposed to marry me. Ginny choked out, shocked to the core. Bonded. Oh, she knew what that meant. She was a pureblood witch. She'd grown up on stories about bonding and marries throughout the family. Not many elected to bond anymore, preferring to marry instead. You were supposed to marry me, she whined again plaintively. Ginny, get over it, will you? You're not a kid anymore, Bill stated curtly. Everyone else is outside, all the food's there too. Come with me. Arthur grasped a hold of his daughter, after urging Lillian to go play with her cousins. Leading her into his office, a stern look on his aging face. Did you get our gifts? Harry asked Hermione, completely ignoring Ginny, as he had done for the past 3 years. Maybe now it would get through her thick skull that he didn't want anything to do with her. It was just utter rotten luck that she just happened to be family with Ron. We did, they're lovely. Hermione said, thank you, handing Hugo over to Harry to let him hold him. You're welcome, Harry said, smiling down at the day-old boy. It was an odd time to have a baby shower after the child was there. Unfortunately, the pregnancy hadn't been an easy one for Hermione, and it was very doubtful Ron and Hermione would choose to have another after it. They'd decided to return for the birth, but go figure the child would be just as stubborn as its parents and come stubbornly into the world early. Everyone quickly made a beeline for the large gazebo that had been erected for the celebration of the next Weasley child. It had been used more in the past few years than the decades that they'd had it, even with Molly having numerous children herself, and the children loved it. Arthur returned with the twins and without Ginny Weasley, who didn't make a single appearance at the party afterwards. As much as Severus dreaded it, he rather began to enjoy himself, as he spoke about his current and past projects with Bill, Charlie and the twins surprisingly, as well as their significant others. The kids had their own tables, and enjoyed their own little tea party. Severus didn't really have time to think too much on past occasions and begin to dislike it, thus time flew by. Where are you going next? Arthur asked in delight, having been regaled with tales of all the countries that Harry and Severus had visited, which was them all. Arthur had never gone anywhere, so it was amazing to hear of all the things they'd done. We've decided to come home and settle down, Harry admitted. As lovely as it was traveling, Willow will need stability as she grows. The founders loved her. He had a portrait they could visit in and they did often. Arthur nodded in understanding. Yes, she will do. She's a beautiful, inquisitive little girl. Not that he expected anything less from a little girl of Severus and Harry's. She was an absolute darling, hadn't even cried when she fell down and hurt herself. Strong, resilient girl. Thank you, Harry said, puffing up proudly. Do you have plans on a career? Molly asked, her tone still a little hesitant. She'd thought her son would become an Auror and was shocked when he suddenly began to play chess professionally. She'd been disheartened at first, then she saw the income and began to realize Ron was doing something he loved and getting paid well for it. All her children except Ginny had thriving careers and were making more than enough money for their families to be more than just comfortable. Harry's bought a building in Hogsmeade. Severus entered into the conversation. It's been entirely redone to be a children's dream, a nursery for newborns up to 6. Not exactly what he'd expected Harry to do, but it was a wonderful idea and he suspected Harry just couldn't trust anyone else with their children. Which, to be fair, he wouldn't be able to trust anyone else either. This way, their daughter could meet and befriend other children in a safe environment and he'd be there every moment she was. Everyone expressed their interest, while Molly looked rather despondent. The thought of her grandchildren suddenly going to a nursery instead of coming home to the burrow was rather daunting. There's always room for volunteers as long as all children are treated equally, Harry whispered to her as they departed later that night. He intended for children of Slytherin students to be invited as well. Perhaps it would prevent the next generation of hatred and house prejudice. Here's hoping his daughter and son would attend a fairer Hogwarts. One that didn't include house separation and practically segregating the Slytherins for the house they were sorted into. More so if his daughter and son ended up in Slytherin. As for the press, the first article contained pictures of his daughter and son, and Harry had rained hell down upon them, suing them for so much that they would have gone into liquidation if Harry himself hadn't stepped in. The reporter ended up in Azkaban for 4 months, while Harry bought the Daily Prophet for a pittance, and since then it had become a very reputable newspaper that reported only the truth. Harry systematically began to change the wizarding world over the next decade. The nursery was just the first step. The Shrieking Shack was torn down, and a building was erected in its place. A primary school, for children 6 years and up to Hogwarts age. For all students, purebloods, half-bloods and the Muggleborns who accepted their children into the school. The ministry had resisted at first, until they realized the futility of it. In the end they had to agree it was worth it. Students as young as 6 years old had training wands, which had been overseen by Ollivander, Severus, as a spell-crafter, and Blaise Zabini and Bill Weasley. They collectively put their crafts together and came up with one that would prevent young wizards and witches attempting spells they had no right using. Such as ones they saw a parent using or an older student. Having a primary school caused Minerva to completely overhaul the curriculum at Hogwarts. Otherwise the students were going to be so utterly dismayed and bored upon entrance to Hogwarts High. Co-aligning so that their education continued on an upward trajectory. Nobody had been more excited than Professor Remus Lupin and Professor Babbling, since runes for beginners were taught in primary school, which allowed her to utterly revamp her own style, and added to the fact first years were now able to take the class it wasn't for third years up. Severus himself had continued crafting potion after potion, spell after spell. He was in no way ready to retire. If anything, he felt like his life had begun anew after leaving Hogwarts. It had been his crutch, his home, but it had also hurt his independence. He always made time with his family, that was definitely the most important thing to him. He also wanted to his children to see how good and worthwhile a career was, and frankly, he wanted people who heard his name to associate it with good, not his spying days. He'd been cleared, yes, but it didn't stop the gossip. He and Harry had spoken to Willow in the days leading up to her first year at Hogwarts. So that she wasn't so utterly blindsided if someone did have the audacity to say anything to her. They'd had that very same conversation with their son just days ago. Neither had so much as judged their father or cared overly much about mistakes he'd made in the past. Just as Harry reassured him, they loved him and nothing would change that. Cedar Cypress Potter Snape. Enough, Harry stated firmly, separating his overzealous brother from his twin sister, who grinned at her brother from between her dad's legs. Ebony enough. Warning her from tormenting her brother further. We want to go to Hogwarts too. They wanted to be big like their big sister and brother. Wouldn't you miss your friends if you went to Hogwarts? Severus asked the twins as he made his way into the hallway. He had a smattering of gray hairs, that he swears the twins had given him. The twins stared at each other before staring at their dad before nodding. Then wait and attend with them, it's only a few years, Severus said, running his hand through their hair. Well adept in fending off the inevitable, I want to go to Hogwarts too, questions having gone through it with Aspen, who had hated being separated from his sister for the 3 years she'd been ahead of him. Although, in reality, he'd calmed down when she'd often come to see him at lunch while he was at primary school. Hogwarts was still a boarding school, but the primary school was a day school. All children returned home in the evening. Did you get it done? Harry asked, putting the 2 sets of lunches, and the gold coins for the cart, into his children's school bags. Not yet, it's not cooperating, Severus sighed, shaking his head wryly. It would come to him eventually. Can I help, Dad? Cedar asked eagerly, completely forgetting that they weren't allowed in the potions lab, well, more accurately couldn't get into it. It had been one of the first things Severus had done. Warded it to the nines to ensure nobody except himself or Harry could get in there. It was the same with the solarium. Safety was the utmost priority in their lives. They did get to play with their potion kits, which were all harmless ingredients and harmless potions. Beginning potions was fun for students at primary school, and in the long run it actually seemed to bring out more potential budding potion masters. Something the world sorely needed, after the way Severus had taught for years. How about after you return from school, and after any homework is complete, Severus suggested. Harry still worked in the nursery full-time. No surprise, but Severus believed his husband would leave once Cedar and Ebony went to primary school. Salazar wants to talk to us, so it will have to be after that, Harry explained from the living room as he finished getting everyone ready for the day. What is it regarding? Severus questioned as he flicked his wand, putting away the food and drink Harry had been using to fill their children's lunchboxes. One of them taking over the Slytherin estate, Harry said quietly. Out of all 4 of his kids, only the twins had so far displayed the ability to talk to SKE.SS. Makes sense really, they're the only ones that could take over the estate. Not necessarily, you certainly could have, just as Willow and Aspen, Severus pointed out. Not really, Willow doesn't have the ability to talk to SKE.SS and Aspen already has the black potential. Harry sighed. Plus, I think you need the ability to talk to SKE.SS to be legible to take on the Slytherin estate, or what's left of it. Willow. Aspen. Time to go. Severus raised his voice but did not exactly shout, he didn't have to. Good point, he'd forgotten that little detail. He's desperate to revive his name, can't say I blame him, Harry said thoughtfully. All of the founders wanted to see their names thrive. Let me guess, Rowena is going to be there as well. Severus asked dryly. He wouldn't be surprised if she wanted Ebony to become the Ravenclaw heiress. She had prince blood after all, and that made her a direct descendant of the Ravenclaw line just like him. Harry laughed a little. Yeah, I think that's on the agenda. Here, you're too late for breakfast, Harry said, handing them over a rapidly cooling Pop-Tart which would have to do them. Plus, if they did get hungry, they had a Tupperware container full of food. Lunch is in your bags, trunks in the hallway. Both Aspen and Willow nodded to answer the question, mouths already full off the Pop-Tarts. They also had their school uniform on, Willow in her green and silver and Aspen in his blue and silver. Both excited to meet the rest of the Weasleys on the train and seeing their best friends. As if they hadn't just had dinner together last night with their Uncle Ron and Aunt Hermione. Cedar, Ebony, let's go, otherwise you won't be able to see your brother and sister off on the train. Severus called, knowing that would get their attention. After that Harry would apparate the twins to his job at the nursery. Meanwhile he had 3 articles to write and a few potions he was trying to create all on commission. They were happy with 4 children and had no plans for more. Naturally, whether they had plans or not, Harry did end up giving birth to another boy, Rowan Lennox Potter Snape. Like all families they had their ups and downs, but Harry and Severus never forgot how hard they'd fought for this. How hard Harry had fought for their family, their lives. Severus had watched his husband's eyes go from haunted jaded eyes to happy jaded eyes, which had been a beautiful accomplishment all on its own. The end. I hope you enjoyed this story. Also remember to subscribe and like this video. See you in the next video.